Welcome to the March 13th, 2025 Planning Commission hearing. I will call this hearing to order at 1:01 p.m. Ms. Carmen, can we please have a roll call vote?
Thank you, Chair Wardlow. I'll begin with Chair Wardlow.
Yes.
Vice Chair Boss.
Present.
Commissioner Barnwell.
Here.
Commissioner Bauke.
Here.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
Here.
Commissioner Peterson.
Here.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
We have quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. We will begin with preliminary matters, requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or ex-agenda items. Ms. DeBusk, do we have any?
Hi, thank you, Commissioner Wardlow. I just wanted to announce that we'll be adjusting the agenda order today, so we will be hearing the update on adaptation and resilience program first, and that will then be followed by the general plan annual progress report.
Thank you. And do we have any announcements or appeals?
None.
All right. Well, that takes us to item C on our agenda, comments from members of the public pertaining to items that are not on today's agenda. Due to time constraints, each person is limited to 2 minutes. Ms. Carmen, do we have any in-person or remote folks that would like to provide public comment?
Thank you, Chair Wardlow. At this time, I don't currently have any speaker slips for general public comment. If anyone in the room would like to speak under general, they can fill one out now. But I'm not seeing any movement. We do have 2 participants online, and one of them has their hand raised, so I'm going to allow Steve Johnson to talk. You will have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you for this opportunity. I simply want to correct some information that was presented at last week's review of the 518 North Milpas project. A commissioner asked what's the maximum possible density using state bonus density, and staff replied basically 50% bonus. State bonus density now allows a 100% bonus, and I'll be surprised if there are not quite a few projects coming in with state bonus density proposals for 100% bonus. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised, and I will acknowledge that we received written correspondence from Ronald Araujo and Steve Johnson, and I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. We will now close general public comment for items not on today's agenda. We will move on to item 3, discussion items. We will start with receiving an update on adaptation and resilience program and 30-year waterfront adaptation plan. We have Timothy Bolton, climate adaptation analyst, with us to provide a staff presentation. Mr. Bolton, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be in front of the Planning Commission this afternoon. My name is Timmy Bolton, climate adaptation analyst in the Sustainability and Resilience Department, joined here today with Melissa Hetrick, who is our resilience program supervisor. Ms. Hetrick will kick off the presentation this afternoon to give a brief overview of the city's adaptation and resilience program, and then I'll give an overview on the recently launched 30-year waterfront adaptation plan and the associated work program, and then we'll have a combined question and answer period after that. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Hetrick.
Great, thank you. Melissa Hetrick, Resilience Program Supervisor in the Sustainability and Resilience Department. And I just wanted to give an update on our program because we really haven't done that in a long time to Planning Commission, but also so that you can see how the 30-year waterfront plan meshes with all the other adaptation efforts that we are conducting as a program. So next slide. So our climate adaptation and resilience program is housed in the Sustainability and Resilience Department. It implements the 2021 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan. It also addresses other climate hazards, predominantly stormwater flooding from changes in rainfall patterns, changes to groundwater levels, and risks associated with wildfire and heat. In addition, we're the city's main coordination point for our hazard mitigation plan and associated FEMA funding. We're working on community resilience, and we've really our predominant role is providing interdepartmental assistance and coordinating across departments for these projects that really do involve almost every department of the city. Next slide. So again, just reemphasizing that we're providing centralized planning to provide a unified approach to adapting to climate change so that the citywide vision can be achieved across all the departments. We're consolidating monitoring and documentation of storm events. We're managing the bigger planning and associated infrastructure projects. We're coordinating a number of interdepartmental staff teams for each project. And we are seeking grant funds and other funding sources for adaptation projects. There's a lot of money out there right now at the state level for resilience. In addition, we provide regulatory and permitting assistance and our liaisons for regional, state, and federal entities. So our program drivers really are implementation of council-approved policies for climate adaptation and hazard reduction. In addition, planning for climate change and especially sea level rise is now required for almost all state planning and permits. And so if you don't have a coordinated approach, a phased approach, you're reinventing the wheel with every plan or project that the city conducts. In addition, having these plans makes us eligible for state and federal climate hazard reduction funds, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So I think you all know that the city already experiences a number of hazards. These are pictures just from the last few years where we've seen quite a bit of flooding and sand deposition at the harbor. We saw the Harbor Yacht Club parking lot collapse into the ocean. We had 2 years of flooding and major wildfires and bluff erosion events. And so these events are getting more frequent and will continue to do so as climate changes. So in 2021, Commissioner Wiscombe will remember because she was part of the subcommittee, but the council adopted the city's first sea level rise adaptation plan. And this plan really puts forward a whole framework for how the city is going to address adaptation over time. It includes a set of guiding principles for adaptation that are basic things, but actually have been extremely useful in prioritizing projects. So things like, public health and safety should come first. Projects that help a wider community as opposed to a few people should be prioritized. Projects with co-benefits, things like that. Those guiding principles have been extremely important as we run them through all of our implementation projects. So the adaptation plan presents a phased approach for addressing sea level rise based on monitoring and then taking certain actions when certain thresholds are reached. It has very specific near-term actions. Over 40 were identified and then prioritized into the highest priority that should have probably already occurred, what should occur in the next 5 years, and then what should occur in the next 10 years. And then it has a decision structure for mid and long-term decision-making. So it really relies on development of a shoreline monitoring program. And we've begun development of that regionally. And in addition, we have begun implementation of pretty much most of the highest priority projects included in the plan. Next slide. So just for those of you who haven't seen the latest projections, these are the 2024 projections from Ocean Protection Council for sea level rise. The different lines just are associated with probabilities of occurrence. So I like to say that the yellow line, the intermediate, is kind of the best odds. It's the line that if you looked at what's happened so far and continued that into the future, it's your best bet. It's the one you'd want to bet on if you're going to Vegas. But when you factor in more ice sheet loss in the Antarctic and take a more conservative approach, the brown line, which is called the intermediate high, is the one that we are required to plan for state permitting and planning. So another thing I'd note on these projections that in the near and even the midterm, the projections are very close together. There's a lot more certainty about what might happen in the next, say, 30 years than out into 2150 when we see that a lot of different factors come into play and that we'll see a range of scenarios. So that's why it's very important for us to be monitoring over time our our sea level rise trajectory and really reevaluating every 10 years or so to make sure that we are making our decisions in a timely manner and know which way we are headed. So that's, again, when we look at planning for sea level rise, we don't talk about specific years that we're going to plan by, but rather specific amounts of sea level rise that have occurred. So things like, we'll do this by 2.5 feet of sea level rise. So for those of you who haven't seen the maps, these are from the adaptation plan. The time frames have changed a bit, but really before 2.5 feet of sea level rise, the majority of impacts are south of Cabrillo. So, erosion on our bluffs and significant impacts to south of Cabrillo. So a lot of erosion, storm flooding, but really with the impacts from sea level rise really being confined to that public waterfront and bluff area. When we move into higher amounts of sea level rise, this is a map for 6.6 feet of sea level rise, we start to see storm flooding from waves, not just rain events, north of Highway 101. That's the dark blue color. And then the light aqua color is regular high tide inundation. And this is, again, without any interventions. While this says 6.6 feet of sea level rise, because we did snapshot views at that time, we have done additional analysis now. And this map really starts to look like this, where it starts filling in north of Cabrillo at around 3 feet of sea level rise. So, next slide. So the other thing we've been working closely on is looking at our flooding events from rainfall. This is the 100-year FEMA flood map in the area south of Highway 101 around El Estero. And this really shows flooding from the 1 in 100 likelihood year rainfall event. Next slide. So we have, as part of some of our implementation projects, looked at the changes in rainfall patterns that have occurred and are projected to occur starting in 2030, although they think they've already started, and what that means for our return intervals for flooding. So this just gives you a snapshot view of some of that information. So for instance, it's projected starting in 2030 that the 100-year storm event that occurs has a 1% chance of occurring essentially becomes the 10 to 20-year storm. In addition, a smaller level storm like the 10-year storms that we've been seeing in the last few years becomes more like a 5-year storm. So it increases in frequency by almost double. So next slide. So to date, we've obtained over $5 million in grant funding from the state for a number of implementation projects that are all currently underway simultaneously. We're working with Beacon, the regional GPA that manages sediment movement along our coast, to develop a regional coastal adaptation monitoring program. We have a draft of that program now, and then we'll be releasing it for public comment soon. And we're really looking at pilot studies with that, partnering with USGS and NOAA to make the data that they already have understandable to managers to be able to track what's happening with our shorelines and sea levels. We've also are about to release the public document for our wastewater and water systems climate adaptation plan. And this really focuses predominantly on the wastewater system, in particular the wastewater collection system, which has major assets in the waterfront area, but is also severely affected during high rainfall and flooding events when water gets into the sewer system and can overwhelm El Estero. So we'll be releasing that plan, and when we have the findings from that plan, we'll come back to you in the summer timeframe. And then we have the 30-year waterfront adaptation plan that Mr. Bolton will talk to you about today that we are launching. We are working on an airport climate adaptation plan. The previous adaptation plan did not include the airport area. And this airport one has been an effort that's being conducted in conjunction with the Goleta Slough Management Committee and other jurisdictions out by the airport. And then we are launching a stormwater modeling project. So we have maps now of the flooding during the 100-year storm from FEMA, but we really don't have good mapping for these smaller level events that occur now very frequently. In addition, we don't have a great stormwater model to look at what kind of improvements we might be able to do to the stormwater system to relieve that type of flooding, but to also look at how water is flowing through the system and how that might change over time. And so we are launching that effort with a $1 million grant from the Coastal Conservancy. Next slide. So in addition, we have a number of future projects that are stemming out of all of these plans. If there's one thing I can tell you, all these plans lead to about 20 more projects that are needed over time. In the major categories, there's a lot. There will be a lot in the waterfront. That really is the front line right now. Again, I mentioned flood-proofing major portions of the wastewater collection system, putting flood walls all around El Estero, looking at flood control projects. We will be applying for grant funding for the widening of Sycamore Creek south of Highway 101. In addition, implementing our monitoring projects. We'll also be, once the stormwater model is developed, we'll be looking at whether we need to change development regulations south of Highway 101 to require flood proofing to higher elevations. At that model, the stormwater model is really needed for that, to understand that information first. But that is an implementation item that's actually required in our coastal land use plan to occur over time. And in addition, we are looking at wildfire mitigation. We are looking at incentive programs for home hardening and other activities that might occur or could occur on existing structures. So next slide. So just timing of implementation, there is quite a bit of money still with the Conservancy, and all the grants we have right now are planning grants. But there was an assumption when we got them that they would be interested in funding the implementation side of the projects coming out of them. So we're really hoping to get through the planning phase and be able to apply for implementation grants in the next 5 years to take advantage of the significant funds that have been given to Coastal Conservancy for coastal resilience projects. In addition, the climate bond included $4 billion worth of monies for climate projects over the next, I believe, like 10 years. And that's really dependent on what agency it's given to and for what purpose. But a big portion of that money is being given to, again, Coastal Conservancy in this fiscal year. So it's really timely for some of our projects. And the city really is uniquely poised to obtain this funding because we're one of the only agencies with an approved adaptation plan with a set of projects that's defined. And just to point out that you guys may be seeing this in your coastal permitting, but really along the waterfront, successful coastal permitting really now relies on having a coordinated phased approach. It's hard to make findings out for 75 years now without having a phased approach to how you would deal with hazards in that time frame for the areas that are right by the waterfront. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Bolton to discuss the approach on the waterfront.
Thank you, Ms. Hetrick. So at the highest level, our vision for the 30-year waterfront adaptation plan is to develop a practical plan that prepares the Santa Barbara waterfront for increased storm surges, erosion, and flooding by providing solutions that preserve and enhance recreation, commerce, beach access, habitat, and critical infrastructure for the near term and future generations. The geographic scope of this effort is the low-lying waterfront area, which spans from Ledbetter Point to the Clark Estate, As you in this room know, the waterfront is a magnetic destination and central element of Santa Barbara's identity. It includes 3 miles of sandy beaches, well-managed open space and parks areas, extensive recreational opportunities, Stearns Wharf, the harbor commercial area, the multi-use beachway, as well as other cherished resources. And the waterfront's a unique section of the California coastline because it's publicly owned and managed, which both creates opportunities for our resilience measures and how we respond to these coastal hazards, but also posits challenges for our operations and management as the government agency. The fundamental need for this project is centered around coastal hazards. We're experiencing impacts during storm events today, and the frequency, severity, and intensity of those impacts will only increase as sea levels rise. So we have to do something. This work effort directly implements several of those high priority elements from the 2021 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Plan that Ms. Hetrick mentioned, namely developing a near-term adaptation strategy for the low-lying waterfront area, as well as improving the resilience for our harbor area. It provides critical analysis required for coastal permitting, which will streamline future CDP review, and it will also make us more successful for future FEMA and climate bond funding, as Ms. Hetrick mentioned. So this graphic here just shows some of the impacts we're talking about within this project area. Ms. Hedrick did a great job, citywide talking about that. Over the last 2 years, we've essentially experienced all of the things shown on this slide here, which include things like bank erosion, damage to structures, sedimentation, and flooding. The reason we landed on 20 years for this near-term plan has a lot to do with that graph on the right. As Ms. Hetrick mentioned, over time there's a lot more uncertainty about the specific amounts of sea level rise. But if you pay attention really to the left of that area, there's a lot more consensus around those specific amounts, and there's certainly a lot more uncertainty as we get towards the end of this century and certainly towards the middle of the next one. 30 years also provides a relatively manageable period for infrastructure management and planning. And it's also a period of time where, as Ms. Hetrick mentioned, it doesn't really require the same large-scale flood control measures that the amounts of sea level rise shown on the right of this graph would require. So there's truly far more options in how we can respond to the amount of sea level rise included in this time period, and truly there's a lot more on the table. And so this slide, Ms. Hetrick already mentioned, and so really the point I just want to hone in is we're focused more so on the map on the left and the various options we have when the general geographic scope of the risk is south of Cabrillo, while paying attention to and setting ourselves up for success for the future paradigm and the large-scale flood control measures necessitated by the map on the right. So how do we do all of this? We're fortunate to have an extremely strong project team working on this. We have exemplary staff supporting and guiding this effort from many of the city's departments. It's not broken down on the slide, but we have a series of teams based on different levels of involvement, with a core team comprised of waterfront staff, Parks and Rec staff, Public Works staff, and Sustainability and Resilience staff who meet with us and the consultant team on a bi-weekly basis. We have a much larger advisor team, which is shown on the slide here, that we pull in during major decision points and kind of key junctures, high-level advisory capacity, including esteemed staff from the Community Development Department. And we're fortunate to have an accomplished consulting team with a deep tech and local presence conducting the technical work and ultimately drafting the plan, which is headed by Stantec and supported by Bionic, ESA, Coastal Restoration Consultants, and Summit Environmental. The key components of this work effort are listed here, which include first and foremost doing updated modeling that fills in some known gaps. It utilizes the latest and greatest state requirements and guidance and gives us a more detailed understanding of risk. A companion piece to this is a high-level analysis of the harbor breakwater and groin systems to see to what extent those should be raised or modified. And then this will all build to a comprehensive near-term adaptation strategy with steps on what to do at defined tipping point and thresholds. And with this effort, we're really trying to move the needle beyond just another planning exercise to one that leads to on-the-ground changes. So included in the scope of this are conceptual drawings for targeted measures, including 30% design drawings to fill in the missing link for the multimodal pathway, as well as doing targeted improvements to the harbor commercial area. And so the idea is that once we complete this plan and this project, we immediately go into permitting, final design, and construction for those targeted elements. And of course, integrated into all of this was a robust community engagement process that will be done in both English and Spanish. And so ultimately, the goal for the 30-year adaptation plan is to end up with something that is actionable, adoptable, permittable, and inspirational while making our waterfront an even more magical place. So diving in a little deeper to each of these elements here, for the updated modeling, in the past we've relied heavily on the USGS Cosmos modeling, which is a fantastic tool that provides statewide modeling of sea level rise and coastal hazards. And it's truly been foundational in getting us as a community to where we are today with sea level rise planning. But there are some known limitations with that model that tends to happen when you're doing modeling at that scale that we'll fix in this effort, enhancing some of the resolution, fixing some own issues, those types of things. We're going to also get a more detailed look at how some of the sediment transport patterns move in and around this area, the influence of dredging and berms on the project area, and incorporate the latest and greatest state guidance. As we develop solutions to address the various hazard vulnerabilities and climate hazards, we'll be looking at the full spectrum of options. It's the beauty of the amount of sea level rise we're talking about is there really is a tremendous amount of flexibility. So looking at things from the quote-unquote gray, which are the more like traditional engineered solutions, seawalls, those types of things, to the quote-unquote green options, which are the nature-based options like dune restoration, those types of things, and then everything in between. I do want to note that while the harbor is a unique case, in general, our permitting agencies and funding partners typically favor the more green, natural, and hybrid solutions over those like traditional engineered ones, so that's something we'll certainly have at front of mind as we start developing and recommending solutions. I also want to point out that while we're looking at the full waterfront area, different areas are going to receive different detailed amounts of analysis. So in specific to that, we're having a heightened look in the harbor commercial area and general West Beach area to address some of the immediate needs related to current flooding, erosion, and other known issues. As I mentioned, we're also have scoped in closing the link on the beachway, and so what I mean by that is hopefully, yeah, you can see my mouse. Okay, so we have the beachway that generally comes here to the main entrance of the harbor. We lose a sidewalk. There's still the multimodal component to here, and then it kind of tapers before we pick it back up over here. So included in this is some sort of improvement that would make it safer for all users to essentially close in this component of things. And I want to highlight that through this entire process, we're working in limited space. There are inherent trade-offs, and so to the extent we can, we're going to be prioritizing solutions that can have multiple benefits. So an example of what that might look like is, okay, we include some sort of multimodal pathway through here, but it also serves as a protection device for the parking lots to prevent against erosion and flooding and those types of issues. And we know that parking is a critical component to public access, and so we're going to maintain it to the extent we can, but there likely will need to be some sort of reconfiguration or relocation of some of the parking in what's shown on this map. So this slide shows our general process for which we'll be using to develop those alternatives. The 2021 sea level rise adaptation is really our guiding light and foundational baseline for so many things, including this effort. After we complete the updated modeling, Stantec will be taking that baseline, applying that modeling and professional judgment and the latest guidance to create 3 to 5 waterfront-wide alternatives. We'll then run that through the city process to distill that down to 2 or 3 options, which will then serve as the basis for what we take out to the community for input. Speaking of community engagement, this effort will be led by city staff and then supported by our Stantec team and Bionic team. One of the things we're excited about with this is we are certainly intend to focus equity as part of this community engagement strategy, and we'll be partnering with Promotores to ensure that we are leveraging and integrating the Spanish-speaking community in this effort, so we're super excited about that. The initial tasks are underway and some are completed, being first establishing the goals and objectives for what that campaign looks like, identifying the key audiences, the key groups, the key stakeholders, those types of things, launching a sentiment survey, which we'll talk about in a minute, figuring out the phasing and timing for when the outreach is most appropriate to make it most useful, and then ultimately having that all build together and dovetail into an actionable engagement plan that integrates into this project to give us a better and more resilient waterfront. Our fundamental philosophy behind the community engagement is that first bullet point, we want to meet people where they are, both from a time and capacity standpoint, but also from a physical and geologic location standpoint. So to that end, we intend to do pop-up interviews in the waterfront, have open houses in trusted community locations, do handouts and posters distributed throughout our town, have an online component with digital maps and renderings, do surveys, have community meetings and the new road shows to appointed bodies like this one. This last month, we had an initial outreach campaign that was primarily centered around just general awareness that, hey, we're doing this effort, we've launched this project, please get engaged, more to come. And we also included a companion brief survey centered around understanding sentiment. So what's working in the waterfront well today, what are the opportunities for improvement, what's your general awareness and concern about sea level rise and coastal hazards? If you add up all the newsletters we blasted to, all the stakeholder and targeted emails we sent, and our social medias, we had about 170,000 potential touch points, which I thought was pretty cool. We had posters and A-frames in and around the waterfront, and we were fortunate to get picked up by a couple of the local newspapers, including the Indy did an article, as well as the Log and the Voice, and I believe Newshawk posted a press release as well. In total, we got 800 survey responses, which I thought was pretty good, and that's going to serve as the foundation for these next steps in adaptation planning and framing some of those adaptation options. So how did this all come together from a scheduling standpoint? We launched the project in September of 2024 and really spent towards the end of the year those like kind of initial project steps of getting the teams together, collecting the data, getting the coordination lined up, those types of things. We are underway with the modeling right now with the consultant team and making great progress on that. In the background, we've been doing a fair amount of outreach, setting up the plan, doing that initial engagement and educational stuff I mentioned. This fall, once we complete the vulnerability assessment, that'll sort of be our next like big outreach push, and we'll be doing some open houses to release the maps and get some more input that'll help further frame the adaptation options, which is what we'll be focusing on, fall this year through early spring of next year. Once we get those adaptation options ready to go, we'll then have another outreach push to get community input on those different options, which will then build towards the admin draft. We'll have a public review draft, hopefully available fall 2026. Do a whole bunch of road shows. We'll be certainly at Planning Commission to have a final plan more or less by the end of 2026 with council consideration in early 2027. So in terms of your commission, grateful to be in front of you today. Appreciate your time and effort in this. Hope you're willing to stay further involved as we get further along in this process. We're hoping that you're available to review major deliverables. We hope to come to you when we have big work products to come and get your input on that. And that can be used to help guide the adaptation strategy and development. We hope you're willing to support the community engagement when we're at those defined points to leverage our communities to help expand our reach and capacity. And then ultimately, we plan to come to you to make a final recommendation on the plan to council, and we hope it'll be a favorable one. And with that, we're here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. This was very informative. So that takes us now to public comments from anyone interested in making comments today. Ms. Carmen, do we have anyone in person or remote on this item?
Thank you, Chair Wardlow. I don't currently have any speaker slips for this item. And while we do still have 2 participants online, I'm not currently seeing any hands raised, though they can raise their hands right now if they'd like to speak. And I'm not seeing any raised hands, and we did not receive any written correspondence for this item, so I'll give it back to you.
All right, great. Well, that takes us to questions from this commission. So who would like to go first? Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like we always do in this particular case, even more deserving, an excellent report. Really a lot of stuff going on there, no question about it. And not only that, but it's a moving target. We can't plan for something in 5 years and expect it to be the same plan in 15 years. And that I know is troublesome. A couple of my observations, number one, are the creeks were not mentioned in the flooding maps that you showed. And in the historical past, some of the creeks have been the agent for flooding around the train station, for example, that section of town. I wonder, I'm sure you're working with the Creeks Committee and everyone associated with that. You may be familiar with the fact that the city of Los Angeles has taken the concrete bottom out of the LA River in about 30% of its distance. I wonder to what degree we are talking about with the Army Corps as another project, another parallel line of investigation. How can we break up the concrete bottom in the creek and recharge the ground with that water, as well as reduce the flood that finally ends up down at the beach? I think that's an ingredient that used to be talked about. I noticed that you're not talking about it here, but it used to be a big topic. So I would offer that just as a discussion point. Another one is, this is going to sound strange, but I was in the formation of the Marge Luke Theater, and we redid the whole theater, and it was really a lot of fun. We had a couple theater people there, and one of our questions was, how are we going to get out to the community the information about what plays are being put on? And the 2 theater people in the group said, oh, we got to have a kiosk. And we all kind of said, a kiosk? What are you talking about? And he said, no, we need this physical thing out in the front. And we're going to put signs on it because not everybody in the community has a computer and not everybody is online and all that sort of thing. Since that time, I find myself looking not only at that kiosk, but at the one that's in front of the Libero. And you guys probably look at it too, and it tells you what's happening at the Libero without you going online or reading the newspaper or anything else. I wonder if you could give some thought to a kiosk somewhere down by the breakwater where we've just put in that statue of the deep water diver. And I say this also because there are travelers who come to our community and vacationers. And this might be something that they might be interested in. It might be something that would cause them to love Santa Barbara even more than they already do and want to live here. Or for some reason, just get the word out about what the community is doing. And it's a very simplistic thing, a kiosk, but it's remarkably effective. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my comments.
All right, and so for this portion, we will stick to questions, and then we'll move on to comments after that. Next on my list is John Bauke, Commissioner Bauke, and then also I have like a blank piece on here. I can't, there's no name, so just wondering what that is. But we can go to Commissioner Bauke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hetrick and Mr. Bolton, thank you for your presentation. It's a lot there, a lot of information. You've got a lot of work going forward. With what's been going on at the federal level, I notice you work with FEMA, you work with the Corps of Engineers, and some of your funding proposes grants that involve federal money. What effect have you seen at your work level at this point with what's going on at the federal government as to maybe recasting your desire or expectations or the interface with federal agencies at this point to do your work?
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. That's a really good question, and I would say a very moving target right now. We've been lucky that on our end, all of our major grants are at the state level, and we're seeing much more funding coming through on the climate bond. Our approach for funding these projects has really been to start with the state money because it's easier to get, and it requires a lot less effort to get, and in addition, they cover 100% of planning, and it's harder to get planning money from the federal government. And then our approach has always been to try to set up the various implementation projects to either get implementation and construction funding from the state or FEMA or Army Corps, whatever might apply the best, or combine them. So we're continuing to do that. In the Biden administration did add a lot of requirements to federal FEMA funding that make it score better if it has aspects to it that have climate resilience or address climate change. Those have not been changed yet, but we'll see how that goes. Projects that we have gotten FEMA funding for are proceeding, so that funding has remained there. As far as our partnerships on the monitoring side with NOAA and USGS, I would say that is the biggest question mark about whether those people will be employed soon and what kind of partnership we'll be able to have. But we do have backup plans on that, and either way, we'll be able to get data. And it just, we're trying to have an option of suite of options when it comes to the monitoring program, and we'll see how the next kind of month or 2 months unfolds with those two departments.
Okay, no, thank you for your
Yeah.
your response. It's important that we understand what your limitations are with what's going on at the federal level. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. And now we will go to Commissioner Peterson. Just ignore it.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It's very helpful to know these things. You're doing very important work and work that will benefit our community. Thank you for your time. I want to focus on the state grants. You've received some state grants. You're going to be going for more state grants. Are these competitive? Are they more guaranteed?
Commissioner Peterson, technically they're competitive, but they're offered on a rolling continuous basis. And at least to date, there are not a huge number of applicants because many jurisdictions, as I mentioned, are not poised with an adaptation plan already ready to go for implementation projects. It's much easier to fund work that is heading toward a specific project than just a general planning exercise. And so there's just not many jurisdictions ready for that. So it really depends on the agency. Coastal Commission funds more like broader planning exercises, but Coastal Conservancy and the climate bond money is much more project focused. And so, does that answer your question, or are
Yeah.
there additional? Okay.
Thank you. So, do you know how much funding we'll be applying for in the next 5-10 years?
I can't give you a definite number. We are going to be asking for several $1 million from the Coastal Conservancy to get up to design phase on that Lower Sycamore Creek widening project. It really depends on how they decide to parse out their money and how that flushes also with our capacity. We have reached capacity for the projects that we have, and so we are looking in the budget to add project manager and some engineering resources because it takes a lot to manage these grants and manage the projects, especially since a lot of them are interdepartmental. It's hard to just hire a consultant for that. And so we are needing to staff up because there's a lot of opportunity right now for us as far as getting funding and doing projects, but we have to be able to actually have the time to do them.
And
Yeah.
I'm hearing what you're saying is that our likelihood is high that we'll get those.
I would say it's higher than others. I think a lot is happening right now at the state level and federal level with changes in funding patterns, but at least for the Conservancy money that they're getting this next fiscal year, which is almost 350 billion, or million, sorry. Excuse me.
Wow.
Just a zero there. Several, but there's a high likelihood for those projects.
Okay. And when we apply for that funding, do we ask our state representatives for letters of support?
Yes, we do. Yes.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Yeah, and I was just going to point out, because I realized we didn't do it in the presentation, but the waterfront plan and several of these projects will actually end in local coastal program amendments, and especially for the waterfront plan, that really is going to be needed to be able to permit projects out there for you all. And so I just wanted to point that out, that you'll be part of that process as well.
Thank you. Is that the remainder of your questions? Okay. Commissioner Wiscombe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I echo my fellow commissioners' great report and great presentation. Thank you very much. I just have a couple questions. You mentioned early on, Ms. Hetrick, consolidated monitoring. Can you explain that term a little bit, exactly what that means?
Yeah, so Commissioner Wiscombe, part of the project that we're working on is trying to decide what that means, but it's basically working as a region. The Beacon region really includes all of Ventura County and Santa Barbara County and all the coastal cities. And so really looking at our whole littoral cell and consistently monitoring and evaluating the same data in the same way so that we're all looking at the same changes and that we're not all doing it separately or hiring consultants separately. In addition, most of the data is already out there. It's just that it needs to be interpreted or or delivered to us in a manner that is easily useful. And so there's just a collective, there's a lot of efficiencies for us doing it as a region. And then in addition, we are trying to partner with our federal agencies because this really could be a model that could be taken statewide and even nationwide. And so to the extent that we can define what our needs as managers are, really helps these agencies because a lot of their focus is on their particular research or whatever it might be, but they don't know what is needed at the local level for decision making. And so establishing that relationship has been really important.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I guess part two of the question, which I hadn't anticipated, would be, are we working regionally then too with Goleta and Carp and, you know, just our kind of our adjacent neighbors in terms of, you know, because it seems to me anything that we were to implement could impact Carpinteria or something. So are we all kind of working together, keeping each other up to date on what's going on?
Yes, Commissioner Wiscombe, we have a sea level rise working group for the region now, and that's been really successful at making sure we're all aware of what we're doing, but also coordinating studies and impacts. The regional coastal adaptation monitoring program actually was born out of that group, the need to be coordinating on that. And I think we're also, especially on the waterfront project, really putting an emphasis on making sure that the consultants look at potential impacts or benefits to our neighbors, because when we make changes in the ocean, it will affect patterns and sediment movement in the ocean and to our neighbors. So.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a great answer. Thank you. And then does the 30-year waterfront adaptation plan require state certification?
Through the chair, Commissioner Wiscombe, it'll require a LCP amendment at the end of this.
Okay, but so that's the state certification.
Yeah, Coastal Commission
Commission. Yeah,
Yep.
okay. Okay, thank you for that. And then I just have one kind of technical question, and if I'm not recalling this correctly, just correct me, please. But my recollection is that the Mesa trunk sewer line is up on top of the bluff. It's actually, I think, on my street, and then it comes down to the waterfront. What would, and I know that's a vulnerability, that at least that's what I recall. So how do you handle something like that in a waterfront adaptation plan where you're not really looking at the bluff, you're looking down at the waterfront? And I imagine that would be one thing that you need to look at in terms of, so are you understanding my question? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Wiscombe, that's a really good question. So the wastewater adaptation study really focused on those trunk mains, especially the ones on West Beach, and we did do some initial erosion analysis of West Beach and where those lines run to see what our approach could be for those areas. We are refining that analysis with the model that's happening through the waterfront adaptation, because it's going to show a much more accurate picture of what's happening in that West Beach and harbor area, where we see a lot of actual accumulation of sand, not erosion. And so what we have found in the wastewater study is that the threat to those lines, the first threat is really flooding of the manholes, which can be sealed, and we do have some time before erosion would actually impact the West Beach sewer. And so the question really there is eventually we will likely want to move that sewer line, but the question is when, because depending on when you decide when, depends on how far back you should probably put it, right? And when you put a big trunk main like that farther back, it requires pressurization of the entire system below it. And so this will be a perfect topic when the wastewater report comes out. It will be a topic of a lot of discussion as part of that. But we really are coordinating the two the two studies to make sure that we're addressing our major assets in both. And when in fact we have some overlap in consultants, then that was intentional to be able to carry over between the two projects.
Okay, so the wastewater one is, it's being done kind of in tandem with the waterfront one, is that?
It's farther along, so we're about to release an adaptation report for that.
Okay.
And we're just starting on the waterfront one, but we did some preliminary analysis of erosion in the West Beach area. And then once we have all the, like, updated analysis, we'll be updating the wastewater plan too, as with regard to the specific recommendations regarding the trunk main. But the other report also covers a number of assets and really covers, I would say, a lot of flooding risk associated with our stormwater system, in addition to coastal erosion. And really, in the near term, that's the bigger problem for the sewer system.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate the the thorough answer on that question. That's really all the questions I have. Thank you again. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Do we have any other questions before we move on to deliberations? No? Okay, what? Deliberations? Okay. My screen is moving around a lot. You're off again, so. Okay, we'll go to Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to say thank you again. I'm excited to see implementation stages of the sea level rise adaptation plan that was done quite a few years ago. I'd forgotten about how long ago that was. And I'm very happy to see that the guiding principles have been useful. That's great. And that, so many times we get these documents and they just go on the shelf, but the fact that you're actually looking at these and prioritizing things is really great, because I know we worked pretty hard on those. My only other comment is the multimodal path. And I think I'm glad you're incorporating that into what you're doing, because it is kind of a mishmash down there. When you get past Ledbetter Beach and heading to the harbor, it's you're going through the parking lot and whole 9 yards. So that's great. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. And next, we will hear from Commissioner DeLuccio.
Yeah, I just want to thank staff. I thank you for your expertise in this and your leadership, and especially the city for taking the leadership and making this such a priority is so important. And especially, I'm impressed by the community outreach you've done, and also incorporating bilingual outreach into this engagement. And and the 800 survey responses, that's pretty terrific. I work in advertising, and that is a really good number. And I know that one of the commission, Barnwell, mentioned maybe do a kiosk or something. There's actually a kiosk at the visitor center on Carrillo. They have an extensive interactive kiosk, which is something perhaps you want to look into. I'm sure they do some nonprofit on that. Also, one thing I did not hear, which I'm sure you perhaps working with the county as part of this also. I know that Commissioner Wiscombe mentioned other cities, and I would think that you're perhaps very involved with the county as well on this. And also, I appreciate the presentation and all the analysis and the modeling you're doing. And it sounds like you're looking at different scenarios to come up with this plan, which is terrific. And as far as grants go, the city, I think, does a terrific job in general in getting grants, and I thank you. And however, I am a little concerned, as we all are, even though I know you mentioned a lot of your grants are state, but when push comes to shove and federal stops some dollar funding, the state could be rebalancing their priorities, and so I guess you guys are looking at that as well, and I'm sure you have some money in the bank already, hopefully. You've actually got some of the funding, so we can keep moving along. So just want to thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. Do we have any comments from any other commissioners? Nope. All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. We really appreciate the time and efforts that your department is doing. I would just echo from some of my fellow commissioners, this was a really helpful presentation just to get a high-level understanding of what you all are working on and kind of the long-term plans that we're doing to ensure the protection of our community and plan for the future. So thank you very much. And that takes us to our next item. What? Sorry, we'd like to take a 5-minute break.
Yeah, can we take a
Okay.
5-minute break?
Okay, sure. We'll take a 5-minute break. Thanks, everyone. this meeting now at 2:06 PM. Thanks, everyone, for the break. We will now move on to our second item in the discussion items, receiving an update on the 2024 General Plan Annual Progress Report. We have Dan Gillett, Principal Planner, with us to provide a staff presentation. The floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Wardlow and Commissioners. Today I'm presenting a focused summary of the draft 2024 General Plan Annual Progress Report. Before I start, I want to particularly thank Jillian Ferguson for coordinating the many staff and putting this report together. This report outlines our city's progress toward the community goals set forth in the general plan, with particular attention to housing production and policy trends. Following your review, this report will proceed to the City Council and then be submitted to the state in compliance with Senate Bill 1333. The General Plan APR is an annual state-mandated requirement for all cities and counties. It keeps the community informed about general plan implementation and presents key data on policy and program performance for the previous calendar year. The General Plan APR coincides with the housing element reporting requirements to the state that show progress in meeting housing production goals. This reporting uses standard tables and allows for OPR, the state governor's office of planning and research, and the housing and community development department to identify statewide trends. As a reminder, the general plan functions as our strategic blueprint, guiding policies and decisions around housing, transportation, infrastructure, and environmental stewardship. OPR provides periodic updates and guidance to make adjustments to the general plan over time. Next, I'll discuss implementation of the general plan. I'm going to be focusing on policy and regulations. There's also notable capital work that's described in the report that's worth noting, that carries out city general plan direction, but for the purposes of the Planning Commission review, I'll be focusing on the policy. General plan updates and code amendments completed in 2024. The big one was the housing element update. Thank you for the Planning Commission for all your dedication and hard work getting us through that review. It was a year late, like many other jurisdictions, unfortunately, but it was certified in early 2024. Another big policy document completed in 2024 was the Climate Action Plan that the Planning Commission was also involved in. And code-wise, there are street improvement requirements, Chapter 2244 of the Municipal Code, that were significantly updated in 2024. In progress, so things that were in progress during 2024, and something that the Planning Commission and City Council saw, adaptive reuse ordinance. Economic feasibility study, I'll talk about this a bit more later on. Creek buffer ordinance, that's still in progress. And we have two other elements of the general plan that we're updating. They're both required to be updated by the state. The open space element is supposed to be updated by January 1st, 2026. And the safety element is always supposed to be updated when there is a housing element update. So it follows that. Turning specifically to our housing production figures, the city was required to plan for 8,001 new units based on projected growth at different affordability levels. So this is for the sixth cycle of what's known as the regional housing needs allocation. How this works is there's a larger number given to the county of Santa Barbara that's divvied up amongst the different jurisdictions. Our share is 8,001. This is an 8-year cycle, so the pace rate is 1,000 units per year to hit the 8,001. With the housing element, there's a requirement for new policies and programs to help meet the housing needs, particularly for affordable housing. So where we're at in the sixth cycle, and there's a difference between when the housing element started at 2023 and when we count from. So we have what's called a planning period and a projection period. So the state identifies the projection period as June 30th, 2022, so we count all units after June 30th, 22. The reason for that is the need is identified by the state, by SBCAG. It's given to the city of Santa Barbara. So that's known before January 2023. So there's a lead time where we know the need is 8,001 units, and that includes that period before 2023. So that's why it starts in 2022. So the total number of units that have been permitted in the sixth cycle thus far is 592 units. 204 of those units were permitted in 2024. And the general pace we've been at is about 200 to 250 over the last several years. It's far below the 1,000 unit rate that would get us to the 8,001 units. In terms of affordable units, there's been 4 units since that time in 2022, 4 very low income units since that time in 2022, 85 low income units, 14 moderate income units, and 489 above moderate units. Those are generally considered as market rate units, but there's no affordability requirement on those units. This is a graph showing the allocation versus the units permitted to this point in our cycle, which goes to 2031 again. In terms of trends, we've got 163 new applications in 2024. That encompasses 1,521 total units. So this is a substantial increase in the units from 2023. A couple big notable things that includes Macy's. It's 689 units at 3805 State Street, and 450 units from the Builder's Remedy project. So these are kind of one-time units that we expect in our pipeline. So for permitting activity, 113 projects received building permits, and that is where we got the 204 new housing units in 2024. That includes 110 accessory dwelling units, about half that number. For regional context, County of Santa Barbara permitted 290 units in the South Coast during the same period. 230 of those are above moderate. And I do want to note there's some new data dashboard we have to look forward to from SBCAG. After this reporting period, they're going to be compiling data from all the local jurisdictions and powerful interface. I've seen a draft of it where we can see how we're doing as a county, as a regional need, and how we're doing as individual cities. Some takeaways from the data, ADUs dominate, again, 89% of applications, and these are typically 1 unit each. Larger multi-unit projects, of course, drive unit count. 1,351 units of the pending units are in those larger projects. And again, production is well below RENA at this point. We do have some strategies, of course, for increasing housing. So in our housing element adopted last year, we have a housing plan, which includes 8 years of programs that we will be working on and implementing that achieve several different goals, including increasing housing. The first one listed here is the Local Housing Trust Fund. This is specifically designed to boost affordable housing development in the city. A really big one, and thanks again to the Planning Commission for your support and help with this, the Objective Design and Development Standards. was adopted by City Council in February. This will be effective on the 27th of March. That was a very big effort. It's a new title of the municipal code, and we have high hopes for that document. Adaptive reuse, we will be coming back to Planning Commission in May to discuss in progress different options and to make sure that we follow the direction and desires of the Planning Commission on that. We do have some questions for Planning Commission on that based on our last hearing. The next one's called Facilitate ADU Production. We're completely revisiting our ADU ordinance. We want to make this more streamlined, more clear. We want to limit the regulations as much as possible for that. Multi-unit housing program adjustments. This is primarily to the average unit size density incentive program, revisiting that in a meaningful way to get more housing production. And the last one listed here, inclusionary housing amendments. So this is related to the economic feasibility study I mentioned earlier. We do have a consultant we're working with, BAE. We've worked with them before. They're working on an administrative draft of a feasibility and nexus study. So a few things that this is going to look at. Looking at our inclusionary housing rates, looking at different unit mixes, looking at in-lieu fees and giving the opportunity to do complete in-lieu fees instead of units. And also looking at a hotel linkage study, and what that does, it would look at the production of new hotel rooms and how that affects the need for affordable housing and potentially putting fees on hotels. That would be a consideration for that. Another big benefit from this study is it'll shed some light on what's going on in our housing market and how developers are doing the calculus, whether or not they're going to take on projects. Our consultant did interview multiple developers and has been looking deeply into our local numbers. Next steps for this report, this will go to City Council on March 18th, next Tuesday. It's submitted to, again, OPR and HCD. It needs to get to them by April 1st each year in compliance with state reporting requirements. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to take questions or even comments from the commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. That brings us to public comment. Ms. Carmen, do we have anyone in person or remote that would like to give public comment today?
Thank you, Chair Wardlow. At this time, I don't have any speaker slips for in-person public comment, and we do still have 2 participants online, one of which has their hands raised, so I will allow Steve Johnson to speak. He will have 3 minutes to speak on this item.
Thank you for the opportunity. I took too much time last week, so I'm going to take very little this time. I'm just going to note that the RENA numbers for moderate income housing, I believe they were 14, those are all inclusionary. There are 0 market rate moderate income housings that have been produced for the last probably 40 years. That record is going to be shattered because next week you're going to review a project at 418 North Milpas that makes use of state bonus density. That project is going to have 35 market rate moderate income units. The reason is because those 35 units are going to be modest size and have no parking space. It's a cinch they're going to rent for moderate income levels. And that's just one. There's many other projects coming forward making use of state bonus density. On slide 15, the strategies said nothing about state bonus density. That's going to be the most powerful tool that the city has. I'll be back next week, so I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
We do not have any other hands raised to speak, and we did receive written correspondence from Steve Johnson on this topic, but I will give it back to you.
Wonderful. We will now close public comment on this item, and I will now open it up to my fellow commissioners for questions. Who would like to go first? Commissioner Bauke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just got a quick question for Dan, and this is a fundamental question, which is, on page 2 of your staff report, you have a chart. That chart shows very, very limited production of a number of categories. Even on the best case, we're going to be on a path of maybe making 25% of the whole if we do 250 units period per year times 8 gets you 2,000, which is 25%. And I know the commission has seen a lot of projects that come in with state density bonus. The city's inclusionary has 10%. How are we ever going to get anywhere close to these numbers? I mean, I just don't see a way with even our policies, or is this sort of just a futile exercise? Or, and that's sort of a rhetorical question, but how do we get there? Because I know the commission's very frustrated. We just don't seem to be getting there. I've got some ideas of maybe how we might get there, and I'll do that in the commentary. But what's your assessment, and how do we even make a better result at the end here?
Yeah, Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Bauke, yeah, we're so far away from these numbers, and our previous RENO was 4,000. It was 2,000 at the end of the 8 years, and we haven't adjusted our regulations or practices much yet. We have a lot of that laid out, and this is it's an iterative process. So in 2029, 2030, we're going to get a new RENA number, and we're going to have to address that. We've learned a lot through this. We looked at FAR before this, removing density limitations. I think the city height limit is a real limitation. I see cities that do substantial redevelopment and huge increases in units. They allow many additional stories beyond what has been traditionally built there. So there needs to be economic incentive. It's clearly developers that have to lead this. But I agree with Mr. Johnson. I think state density bonus is becoming more and more generous over the years, and it's where a lot of developers are going to, and I think we're going to see most of our units through the use of state density bonus moving forward, at least in the near term.
Chair Wardlow and to Commissioner Bauke, there's kind of a rub. So we're getting more units through state density bonus, but the percentage of affordable units that the developer has to produce is very low. So, that's kind of like, how do we get these very low units if the developers aren't required to produce a whole lot of them to get the bonus density? So that's just, it's something to maybe talk to our lobbyists about.
Right. And, that sort of leads me to sort of the other questions I had, which was on your slide 15, you talked about some of the housing element programs that we're doing, which, hotel linkage fees, inclusionary housing amendments. I was wondering, you didn't mention the enhanced infrastructure finance district concept that is listed on one of your programs on housing element 31. Is that being addressed and studied? At one point, I heard from the community development director or the planning director that was being done as part of BAE's work. Is that still being done? Because I think that may be one of the tools that we could actually do this with the Housing Authority, so.
Yes, Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Bauke, that is something we've discussed internally. It's not part of BAE's scope of work right now. What this slide is focusing on is pretty near-term programs, and that would be considered a bit further off, but there is interest in that.
Okay, thank you. That's the only questions I have at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. We will now go to Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Gullett, for the report. I just want to see here what, so the 1,521 new units in 2024 housing applications, that, I got the three major projects that you talk about on page 2 of your staff report add up to 1,034 units. So of the 1,521, the 1,034 of those three projects is included. Okay, so that represents 68%. Okay, and what's the status on environmental review for these projects? They're coming to us first for concept review, and then they're going on to, maybe Mr. Buss can help me on that one.
Commissioner Wiscombe, I think you're referring to the AUD projects that are coming to Planning Commission for a conceptual review?
Yeah, or let's just talk about Macy's. Is that going through an environmental review?
Correct. So Macy's application has been deemed complete, and it's now going through environmental review.
Okay. So that will come back to us with the status of that environmental review. Is that correct?
Commissioner Wiscombe, actually, that project is currently not requiring any Planning Commission discretionary actions. It would be going to the staff hearing officer for a subdivision map and then design review.
Oh, wow, okay. Design review by
the Architectural Board of Review.
Okay, thank you. So it's not coming back to us. It doesn't have to come back to us for any sort of environmental review?
No, it does not.
Oh, okay.
If there is an environmental impact report, then the public comment period may be held at the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then this is kind of niggly, but on the same page, there are 159 applications for ADUs with 110 units permitted in 2024. And then, so the other 49 applicants, have they just been applications, so they've just been carried over to 2025, is that right?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Wiscombe, yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Just submitted in '24 and
Okay.
not completed yet.
And then you didn't really dwell on this, but the open space element, update by 1/1/2026, has plans and programs addressing climate resilience. So do you, Mr. Gullett, can you provide, or Mr. Buss, can you provide an example, just a really quick example of what a program or plan would be in that particular open space element?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Wiscombe, we're in the early stages of really getting our hands around this. We've been looking at what other jurisdictions have done. Our open space element hasn't been updated since, I think, 1972, so it's very, very out of date.
Okay.
And we have options in how we address these issues.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then the new, 2023 to 31 housing element has a new policy, streamline processes for ADUs and affordable housing projects. So my understanding is ADUs, although Mr. Gullett, you said there's going to be more streamlining, you're going to try to get easier on that, but you have certain architectural styles now that can be applied, right? That they kind of streamline the permit process, is that correct?
Commissioner Wiscombe, we do have a pre-approved ADU program that was launched last year, and so applicants submitted plans that went through our design review board so that we could have pre-approved designs. Those designs are now going through the building division so that we can confirm that the plans meet those building standards as well. Once that has gone through, then we'll be posting the various designs on our website for the public to choose if they, would like to use one of those. It's a shorter processing period if you choose one of those designs because it's already gone through those early stages, and I believe there's reduced processing fees as a result.
Okay, so that's part of the streamlined permitting process that Mr. Gullett referred to earlier. Okay, so what about efforts to streamline processes for affordable housing projects? I know that the City Housing Authority has many times talked about going to the head of the line because they have to apply for grants and they miss a cycle because they're in queue and can't get through it. So where are we in that process? That seems to me to be very important.
Chair Wiscombe, I can start, and Mr. Gullett can add on anything that I miss. But we have updated our Accelerate program, which was previously really geared towards projects in the downtown, but it now includes affordable housing projects. So if you have an affordable housing project, it's identified as such and does move to the head of the line in terms of getting placement on a design review agenda, as well as building permit processing.
Oh, great. Okay, so that's in place. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay. And then on page 20 of the report, I'm just going to turn to it because I'm on page 20 of the report, it talks about Goal 8, Fund Affordable Housing. And then it goes to HE 31, which I remember very well. We put this in there, Secure Permanent Affordable Housing Funding. And then it says, passed a half-cent sales tax measure to fund affordable housing initiatives. No commitment has been made. I mean, that sales tax is general fund money. And to my knowledge, there's been no commitment made to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund through this, or no dollar commitment. Is that correct?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Wiscombe, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
So
general fund money, but there has been a continuing conversation about some of that money going to affordable housing.
Okay, so do you think it's fair to say that I mean, is it a guarantee that there's going to be money going into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund? That fund needs a permanent source of funding identified. And so are we making progress towards making that the permanent source of funding?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Wiscombe, the city administrator and city council are having discussions with the budget on how Measure I is divided up. I will say for HE 31, it's something that we want to keep. I don't want to say that we've completed this and we're done looking for affordable housing funding. This is something that's ongoing.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to see when you get into the BAE study on in lieu fees, I'd like to see possibly some of that money go in there too. That seems to be a very logical source, but okay. And then on page 26 of the report, just more for my edification, it says that City Council allocated $2.9 million in matching funds to apply for matching grants for 2 affordable housing projects, and that the grants were scheduled to be awarded in late February or early March. Do we know the status of these grants yet, since we're kind of mid-March?
The last communication I heard about these was that the state received the applications. The applications were adequate, but I have not heard about funding yet.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then my next question is on the Daytime Navigation Center, FARO. It's been open for 7 or 8 months now, and are we or SB Act collecting data to measure the successes, failures, or areas that might need modification in the Faro Center? And is there going to be a report to council, an annual report to council on the successes and in the services, how the demand's been for the services, et cetera?
Yeah, Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Wiscombe, I don't know of any requirement to collect such data. I'd be surprised if it wasn't collected, and I'm happy to convey to the staff that that's a desire.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think that's really important because they do a lot of things at that center, and some of them, may be great, and some of them may not be getting the attention that they should, or improvements could be made. So, and then, so where is the safety element in progress? Is that, you said that that's in tandem with the housing element, so are we close on that, or?
It's more in tandem with the open space element. It's required to be updated after you update a housing element, but there's no timeline on it. So we're working on those two in tandem, and they may be considered in tandem or separately, but they're being worked on at the same time.
Okay. And then, Mr. Gullett, you mentioned the counties compiling data to be published on, do you have any idea when that's coming out, and could we, as planning commissioners, get a copy of that?
Yes, I will happily send the link out to the Planning Commission. It's pretty cool. It's Power BI and story maps. It's really nice data and presented in a very nice way, and it's interactive.
Okay.
And I will share
Thank
that.
you. Okay, and then my final question, I'm sure, thank goodness for that, is I just want to ask you about, which I thought of today, is about Salterra, which was sold to UCSB. So that was in our 2024 numbers, right? So what exactly happens to that now that it is, does that stay in our RENA numbers, or it leaves our RENA numbers, right?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Wiscombe, it's in the city, so it counts toward our RENA.
Even though UCSB owns it now?
Even though UCSB owns it, correct.
Okay. But we don't have any idea what their mix of, are they still required because it's in the city to have the inclusionary units, et cetera?
We would assume the inclusionary units, at least. The Regents or UCSB may have a different mix moving forward. The way we're counting RENA units, it's just year by year. So we'll count it as it is this time, and it will just be part of our housing mix moving forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your answering my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Now we will go to Commissioner Boss, or Vice Chair Boss.
Thank you, Chair. I also want to appreciate, I know a lot of work went into this from Ms. Ferguson, and a lot of other departments. It's a lot of information to collect and collate, so thank you. I also have a lot of questions, so I'll apologize in advance. In the staff report, on page 2, you acknowledge that RENA establishes the number of housing units the city must plan for, but does not require their production. Can you remind us of the penalties, though, if we do not meet our RENA figures?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Boss, the main one that affects the city is like the 2017 SB 35, which provides for a streamlined ministerial process for projects when we're not meeting certain RENA targets and projects have a certain affordability mix in them. And I believe the thinking of the legislature with that is, okay, city, like there isn't production there. Let's see what we can do to streamline until you get to some threshold with your RENA production. I don't. Ms. Ostringer might have other examples of what penalties there could be.
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Boss. I can't think of any beyond SB 35, but just as an update, the Housing Authority is using an SB 35 for one of their projects, so that to the point of prioritizing projects and getting them through faster, the Housing Authority is actually using that, so, which is the SB 35, for, if you don't know, is the ministerial streamline.
Thank you. Sorry, scanning through. I was curious, on page 18 of 59, you mentioned CDBG and home funding, and I'm curious, I know the county and other jurisdictions pool their funds together. Is there a reason that the city does not? So they pool funds, and then 1 year it's in Goleta, 1 year a project is in Santa Maria, but they're able to, I think, make a bigger effect on housing projects.
Chair Wardlow, I don't know the answer to that, but I'd be happy to follow up.
Okay. And then getting into the completed programs, I know Commissioner Wiska mentioned a few of these, so we don't yet know when we'll know about the Local Housing Trust Fund. And did I understand correctly that only 2 projects were in the application?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And then the home repairs program, so HE 25, that was marked as completed, but I think, is that just one-time funding? So it's allocated 60,000 in CDBG funds?
Could you?
Or is that ongoing? Sorry,
you show
on
what page,
page 20 of 59. So HE 25 was fund home improvements and repairs. My understanding was that's just one time. So I'm curious on a few of these programs. They're marked completed, but it's one time. So
Yes.
are there no plans to fund that in the future?
Yes, thank you for that. And similar to HE 31, I think HE 25 is better categorized as ongoing than completed.
Okay, so that should be under ongoing, not under completed. Okay, thank you. And then I did have a follow-up question about the secure permanent affordable housing funding, and I think Commissioner Wiscombe hit most of my questions and points. So that should also be moved to ongoing. That should not be completed, correct?
Yes, I did
Okay,
that.
okay, perfect, thank you. But moving on to ongoing, HE 8 on page 21, innovative housing types. I may have missed this, but it just interests me. Is there an opportunity for a public to participate?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Boss, absolutely. So these will all have their own different public outreach and public processes depending on what they are. We are in active conversation with Habitat for Humanity about this one right now, but we will expand that conversation as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Then HE 9, the creek buffer. I was trying to understand how this helps with housing production and preservation.
Chair Wardlow and Commissioner Boss, the reason that that's called out as benefiting housing is that by establishing a citywide buffer, developers know going in how much area should be devoted to creek protection. Currently, we do that on a case-by-case basis, and it requires applicants to submit technical reports, biological reports, et cetera, in order to determine what is the appropriate buffer. So that's why that was viewed as a benefit to housing production.
Okay, so it's that certainty that we heard from. Okay, thank you. And then moving to HE 23, I was really excited to see that 28 affordable housing covenants were extended and was curious how. Were there incentives to homeowners?
Chair Wardlow, Vice Chair Boss, I don't know about these particular instances, but what often happens is a housing unit will turn over and a covenant will be reestablished. Like our covenants are 90 years currently, so a new covenant would be put on a unit to keep it, so it's more like perpetual affordability.
Oh, understood. So it may have been that title changed hands. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. HE 24, the also fund home rehabilitation. So I think this is different from the Habitat CDBG funding. Is that correct? The dollar amounts were different, but I was trying to, I'm not familiar with the program. and couldn't find it online?
I believe so. I'm not very familiar with it either,
Okay,
but we can get you that information.
thank you. And then page 22, under HE 29, the affordable, HE 30, affordable student, staff, and faculty housing. There's a note that the city is partnering with Santa Barbara Unified, and I thought that was the housing authority, not the city. Or is the city contributing funds? Because that would be great also.
Commissioner Boss, I believe you're correct, that it's Housing Authority that's partnering. The city is participating in that we're processing their application and working with them to move that forward.
Okay.
But
So-
yeah, I'm not aware of funds per se.
Yet, okay. So it probably should be rephrased to say that the housing authority is partnering with the school district, correct? The city,
Chair Wardlow, Vice Chair Boss, there have been conversations with the school district. We are also doing this assessment of city lands moving forward through this housing element cycle, and there may be opportunities to coordinate with school district on housing for employees. But yeah, I agree that this language is too specific for this document right now.
okay, thank you. Moving to page 26, and this is on the Local Housing Trust Fund as well. I am curious about just the ongoing funding source. So it sounds like there's going to be some dollar amount from the sales tax. We don't know what dollar amount yet, but can you detail some of the other funds contributed? I think there was maybe sale of property. There were contributions from the 101 Garden Street project. Where are the other contributions coming from that were one-time and that are ongoing?
Chair Wardlow, Vice Chair Boss, a lot of these questions are better answered by our housing staff, who's not here unfortunately right now. This fund was just set up last year, and a lot of the funding for it hasn't been identified yet. We just wanted to get this established and establish a purpose for it, and we know that we need to find more funding for it. So some housing in lieu fees, I understand, contribute to this. And I believe some general fund money, but I don't know details about that right now.
Okay. I know that it would have had to be in the application for the state matching funds because we would have had to show ongoing, annual funding source. So I'll try and get access to that. And then moving to page 33. A few questions here. Sorry, takes me a minute to scan through the pages, sorry. I think just a comment or correction. So one of the grants was actually awarded in April 2024. So I think it's good to update that. I think I imagine the state would want to see that. The state invested $8 million into that grant, and that was awarded almost a year ago. So it's in the Santa Barbara County section. It notes the encampment resolution funds. So that was awarded last April. So the city has had it for a little while. I'm trying to skip a few questions, sorry. So I'm going to go to page 34 in open space. I didn't understand, couldn't find online the definition of the areas of value in undeveloped state. Can you define that for me?
Chair Wardlow, Vice Chair Boss, there's certainly ecological, biological values. There's also fire resilience values too areas in undeveloped state. In the past, the city's general plan has recognized visual openness as something valuable to the community, and even identified the Highway 101 and Montecito Country Club as open space in the previous open space elements.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll skip ahead to page 43. This is kind of along the same lines. The Louise Lowry Davis Center was listed as open space. Can you help me understand the open space section there? Is it the lawn bowling area?
Chair Wardlow, Vice Chair Boss, the Presidio is also listed as open space. We want to revisit all of that when we relook at the open space element, because we don't think it aligns with what we're wanting to do with the open space element moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question for now. On page 40, the Lower East Side Community Connectivity Active Transportation Plan, it mentions grant applications, and I was unclear if any general fund was being contributed or if that won't move forward unless we get some sort of competitive grant funds.
My understanding is competitive grant funds were needed to get the grant for that project. I don't have detailed information of the funding for that project, but typically these projects, we try to get them fully grant funded if we can to relieve the burden off of our general fund. And as the commissioners have noted on the previous item, the city's pretty good at getting grants for these types of projects.
All right, thank you. I think those are my questions for now. I know I had probably 24 other questions and would really appreciate a response. I know it takes time to get responses, but thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Boss. We'll now go to Commissioner DeLuccio.
Thank you. Some really good questions so far. So I have some questions. So I'm actually, I want to thank staff for all the work they do. I'm going to say it that way, because a lot of work has gone into this. And however, the numbers are disappointing, because maybe all the mechanisms aren't in place yet. I just don't know how we're going to get to the numbers we need. So this report goes to the state, and then what is that? And what happens? They look at it, and could that trigger SB 35?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner DeLuccio, yes. So they look at all our production numbers, and they provide a list of all the jurisdictions and their status as it relates to SB 35 periodically.
So once if that was to get triggered, I guess it can be removed if production picks up or something.
That's correct.
Okay. Also on page 14, it's about 689 units. The 110 South Hope Avenue, is that the housing or authority's project that just did it just break ground? Not yet. I guess it is, right?
Commissioner DeLuccio, I'm not sure which project. They have a project at 15 South Hope.
It's 110 South Hope.
110 South.
It's in this report. It's 689 units. These are the applications for 2024, and it's lumped together with 3805 State, and it's 110 South Hope. I imagine it's across the street.
This is the Macy's redevelopment.
The 110 South?
Yeah, there's two addresses.
Oh, I see. It's the back portion. I got it. Okay. So help me here on some of these housing element programs, HE16. What was the People's Self-Help Housing Project, the 65 units? Where was that located? I'm on page 20 of the report. There's one that was 47, which that was the housing authority. Is that the one on La Cumbre? And then,
Oh, yes. Yes, Chair Wardlow, Commissioner DeLuccio, there was reference to those two projects that were going to be funded by the trust fund. So those are the two projects in that bullet. So the 47-unit affordable housing project with Housing Authority is the one on Hope Avenue, so 15 South Hope. And the other 65-unit project with People Self-Help Housing, that one is on Correa Street downtown.
That's a career, okay, the other one's on Hope, okay, so La Cumbre is not included in this one. It just broke ground, I think, this year. That's, also, when we talk, also about the affordable housing, I would have liked to have seen possibly if that, it seems to me there's more at this point secure permanent affordable housing right now besides, we mentioned past the 1/2 cent sales tax. There must be other little crumbs around that we could have put in this report perhaps?
Chair Warlow, Commissioner DeLuccio, not yet. We're getting there. So again, the housing element's just a year old. The trust fund is very new, so we're still looking for funding sources.
Is it enough for you to get information on what's in the housing fund, or is that not what our role here? I'd like to see, what as of end of 2024, what else was in the housing fund, what the balance is, and what that was made up of. So I don't know if that's something we can get, or is it in our preview?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner DeLuccio, I can get that for you,
Okay,
and I can email it to you.
thank you very
And I
much.
can email it to the entire commission if
Okay, that'd be
ever.
great. And what is HE8 on page 21, explore multi-generational triplex prototypes?
HE8 innovative housing types, it's fairly open-ended. It's looking at things like modular units, these triplexes, different like physical building types than we see typically, and what our current constraints are, and if we can remove those.
Okay. One other thing on this HE17, I guess, is that a correct number? 1,220 clients are served with rental housing mediation program in 2024?
They have a lot of work.
That's a
Unfortunately.
big number. And then let's see if I have any other questions here. I guess I'm looking forward when we jump ahead to when we finally see some inclusionary housing element in 2026. With that, when that comes about, is that going to trigger your multi-unit housing program adjustments as part of that, you think?
Chair Warlow, Commissioner DeLuccio, that's a great question, because part of what BIE is doing is they're looking at all our regulations, setbacks, other zoning requirements. So as we adjust those, they may identify ones that are particularly limiting as part of this. A good practice is to do these types of studies fairly regularly, maybe every 5 years. So we may be in a circumstance where the study has been done, it informs things, a new inclusionary requirement's in place, and we make some adjustments. It's an iterative process that way.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLuccio. Now we will go to Commissioner Peterson.
Thank you. Appreciate all the work that you and everyone has done on this. Echo what has been said before me. I have a few questions. In your presentation, you mentioned that there's no affordability requirements on moderate units. Is that correct, or did I mishear that?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Peterson, our inclusionary requirement for rentals is moderate. So we do have a requirement to build moderate. Okay. So I did make a comment regarding the above moderate units.
All right.
Yeah. So the above moderate are typically, and we do have some exceptions locally, are typically not. We don't regulate the rents.
Right. Okay. And then you mentioned that 89% of applications you've received this year are for ADUs, but that's not in relation to the number of units. When you look at the table, that only 10% of the units are actually EDUs? Because we have a few big projects, right?
And again, for production, the point at which the state counts is building permit issuance. So we had 204 units total, like 110 of those are ADUs. So what we've been seeing since 2017, when the state made ADUs a lot easier to build, is about half our units each year have been ADUs.
Okay, thank you. How many adaptive reuse projects have we seen? All right, it doesn't need to be a specific number. Is it a few? Just a few? And then let's even, sorry.
Commissioner Peterson, yes, it is a few, and I know we have a couple that are in process now, kind of waiting to see where the ordinance goes and trying to get through it a different way in the interim.
And the ordinance is going to be addressing some of the barriers that you think the property owners are feeling. You mentioned that the city height limit is a real limitation. Does that have anything to do with adaptive reuse, and do you think it's the biggest limitation?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Peterson, for adaptive reuse, we're primarily looking at existing buildings. We do have rules that limit if it's non-conforming, if you can have residential. So it's a very small limitation right now, but we discussed with the Planning Commission very much liberalizing our regulations with adaptive reuse, including no density limit, a lot more freedom and flexibility on open space and parking too, which are the main limiters of adaptive reuse.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the questions on how we navigate compliance with the housing element. Is SB 35 the primary stick that the state uses if we fall out of compliance, or are there other problems what we'll deal with?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Peterson, I just want to be careful with the nomenclature. So when you're non-compliant with the housing element, you're exposed to a lot of things, including builder's remedy. The RENA is our goal. So with SB 35, they're just looking at where we're at in the housing cycle versus the number of units per affordability level. So it's not necessarily not compliant, but at some point you just need 10% affordable to use this streamlined ministerial process. But it is the primary tool the state's using right now to increase housing in these jurisdictions that aren't building as fast.
Should have clarified making sufficient progress as we go. Is there any help that we need from HCD that we're not getting in terms of making sure we're making sufficient progress?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Peterson, HCD's staffed up quite a bit. They're very responsive these days. I think it's more the legislature. So we get these numbers for RENA, and we've got categories like moderate that we really have a hard time finding tools that are effective to get these affordable units.
Okay. I want to ask kind of a speculative question in the future. Hopefully this never happens, but if we have the context in which builder's remedy applies, say in the next 5-6 years, is it true that any new builder's remedy projects have to comply with the new builder's remedy law, AB 1893? And do we have more control, more local zoning control under that law? Or should we report back on this later?
Commissioner Peterson, it clarifies a few things for us and what builder's remedy, what limits we can place on the projects, but the builder's remedies that we have right now haven't elected to go under that one. So, I mean, we'll see next housing element update where the state's at and with this particular builder's remedy provision. It might be changing, that's years away, so.
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully we don't have more builder's remedy projects. But I understand that the projects in the pipeline now have the choice to choose between the old and the new. But for future ones in this hypothetical, would they only be subjected to AB 1893? And then maybe later we can talk about, do we have more control over those
Right.
types of projects than we did in the old regime?
I can't answer that for sure. I don't remember. So
Okay.
I believe they'd be going under the new one, but I'll have to double check. I don't want to give you bad information.
All right, thank you. And then my final question is, building off of Commissioner Boss's question, the Lower East Side Community Connectivity Active Transportation Plan, is there any project cost estimate associated with that?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Peterson, so the city has a capital improvement program that should report the full cost of that project, and I can look that up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Peterson. Next, we have Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My apologies, last topic for confusing comments with questions. I agree with most of the comments that have been made by my fellow commissioners here. I have a couple of other small ones. Yeah, no, they're questions. No, I got it right this time. I got it. Did I use the word comment? Sorry. We have not mentioned the word in lieu in any of this document. Is there a reason why, and why it isn't being used as a phraseology for putting into that housing fund, et cetera?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Barnwell, so we currently have in lieu fees for inclusionary that fund some affordable housing functions. What we've been talking about and what our consultant BAE is working on is an in lieu option for inclusionary for new development moving forward. So that's very much a part of their work, and you'll be seeing that probably this summer.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure, on page 21, it was brought up by a couple of other commissioners, I guess it's HE8. Did I hear you say that that does include things like modular homes, which is innovative housing types?
Oh, that's right.
And does it also include things like the little tiny homes development that's over on Santa Barbara
As you
Street?
mentioned, yeah.
Okay, thank you. On the next page, on HE30, where we take credit for something they really don't have much to do with, which is the Santa Barbara Unified School District teacher housing, what are we doing about establishing liaisons with other schools to do this same thing? Because, and I say that, like, for example, City College, maybe even private schools. I don't know why, if private schools have an impact on our housing stock, why wouldn't we be talking with them as well? And I think, could we expand this general discussion?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Barnwell, yes, it needs to be expanded. Just an example, Westmont does some of their faculty housing. We've had a couple projects in the city from them. We've had discussions with City College in the past about doing big projects on City of Santa Barbara land for their faculty. So all of it.
Thank you. I was a little surprised. Am I reading this correctly on page 28? Pre-approved accessory dwelling unit designs. It says that they will be sold. The architects who came up with those designs are now selling those designs to the ADU applicants. Is that correct?
Commissioner Barnwell, that is correct. These are not city-sponsored designs. They are private architects or designers' designs. We will put them on our website, but they are still entitled to charge people for those designs if people choose to use them on their private property.
Do we have city-sponsored designs?
It's something that we've talked about and have been thinking about, but it would take some upfront money in order to get that, so it hasn't moved forward at this point.
Thank you. Ordinance amendments completed. We talk about the street improvements requirements. It's on page 23, and it references a variety of topics associated with street improvements. Does it include an inventory and a codified requirement for curb parking? It talks about parking and it talks about street improvements, and that, I believe that includes cars parking at the curb. And how is that included in this discussion, I guess is what I'd like to know, or is it?
Commissioner Barnwell, I believe, I'm not finding it on the page that you referenced, but I believe you're referring to the improvements or the edits to our ordinance in Chapter 22.44, which
Right.
regulates public improvements. So that is really about sidewalk width and dedication. It does not get into use of the curb.
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Barnwell. So with the dedication, that's where the sidewalk widening is. But there's also curb to curb that's considered, and street parking as well. But that's not part of 2244. It's considered separately. And this essentially, like, the curb face stays in the same place with these dedications, but the sidewalk expands.
Thank you. On page 39, we talk about the climate action plan and EV charging stations. To what degree does the city of Santa Barbara own and operate and/or lease the EV charging stations that are in, and is that part of this discussion? How we operate them, how we own them, how we lease them?
Chair Wardlow, Commissioner Barnwell, as you know, there's EV charging stations in many city facilities. I don't know what the financial situation is with those.
Thank you. Excuse me, Madam Chair. The airport, page 47, the airport master plan update. I believe we might have seen that. I don't know, maybe my memory's failing me, but does that include a discussion of a restaurant for patrons who are not taking flight, but who are waiting for arrivals? Which used to be out at the airport, but it isn't anymore. Does this include that discussion?
Commissioner Barnwell, I have only seen rough plans, and I do not recall offhand
Okay.
if it includes that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnwell. Next, I have Commissioner Peterson, but I feel like this is a mistake. Is that, or are you? Okay, great. Next, I have Vice Chair Boss again.
Sorry, just a couple more questions. I was trying to look online also for the APR form that we submit to state HCD, and I couldn't find that. Where can I find it? I'm trying to wrap my head around all the measures, and that would help me.
Yeah, so Chair Wardlow, Vice Chair Boss, we intended to have that up and available on our website before this hearing, but we're still putting the finishing touches on that. When it is available, I will share it to the Planning Commission.
Okay, so we don't have access, nor does the public have access to comprehensive updates on all of our policies and programs in the housing element update.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions from my fellow commissioners? No, okay. Well, I have a few questions. I do want to just jump off of the question that Commissioner or Vice Chair Bosch just asked. Why is it that we would not have that available to the public?
Chair Wardlow, we want the information to be accurate, and not all the staff is available that has been working on this document. So we fully intended to have it available. We will certainly have it posted before City Council next week.
Okay, great. That's super helpful. Thank you. Okay, so first, thank you very much, Mr. Gullett, for your time. I know this is a ton of work for you and your whole department, so thank you. I will jump into my questions now. So regarding HE 16, our favorite topic of the local affordable housing trust fund, can you share how much money was in the fund when it was first created? I know this was just a year ago, but just to get an understanding.
Chair Wardlow, again, I apologize for not having housing staff available that manage this program. I believe it was $500,000 initially that was needed for the application to the state, but I will follow up with accurate information. I don't have that.
Leslie, Commissioner Wiscombe, do you want to say something?
There was an excess amount of money that council allocated to the housing, this is my recollection, to the Housing Trust Fund as an initial deposit. And I can't remember, do you remember that now? It was more than 500,000, it was over $1 million. Yeah, it was close to 1.9 or something like that. But that initially got allocated by council as excess funds, long gone days, but that went into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It's my recollection.
Yes, Chair Wardlow, we will follow up on financial details on the Housing Trust Fund, but I believe that Commissioner Wiscombe is correct.
Okay, and then do you have a sense, and if you don't, because you're explaining that you may not have this information, do you have a sense of how much funds are in the fund now?
I do not.
Okay.
But we will get that.
So we've applied for a grant for $2.6 million. That's my understanding as of now. And other than that, we have no sense of really where this program's at right now.
We will follow up with detailed financial information on the local housing trust fund.
Okay, so would be accurate to say that this program has not been completed since we do not have a funding stream. We just have created it. We just don't know if we have, how much money we have in it, how we will fund it, things like that.
Yes, and Chair Wardlow, we expect different funding sources to feed into the local housing trust fund as we create those. So this was categorized under completed, but is very much not completed.
Okay, and that will be updated before this goes to council?
It will be updated before it goes to the state. The council report is published today.
Okay. I feel like that's a significant difference, right? Like this is, and I have more of these, right? There's a number, we have 5 completed projects. From my understanding of this conversation, 2 of those have actually been completed and 3 of them are not completed. So I would think that when we propose this to council that we would want that to be accurate.
Chair Wardlow, I think the ones that we've identified as also ongoing, actions were taken in 2024, right? So each year, I think they would be listed as the things that were completed under that program, but the program itself is ongoing for the entire duration of the housing element. It's not something that we can check off. We will be doing it every year, but that doesn't mean that things aren't completed each year. So I think that's why it was listed under completed, to identify that things were done. It doesn't mean we're walking away and saying we checked the box. It will be ongoing, if that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense, especially with the Housing Trust Fund in the respect that it has been created, but it is not being, we can't utilize it, right, when it's completed would mean to me that there is a funding stream, that it is actually usable. And so as of now, we're not there yet. So I see this as still not completed. But I understand the first step has been created, which is obviously really important. We need a permanent funding stream, correct. Okay. All right, well then I'll move on to my next question around this. So For HE 31, which feeds into this larger discussion on the trust fund, we've passed a half-cent sales tax. When you mentioned that council has not directed this money to be a permanent funding stream for the trust fund, is that correct? Not yet.
Chair Wardlow, I watched the council hearing when they discussed this. My understanding, it was going to be revisited with additional context of the city budget to understand how Measure I is going to work with everything else. So the discussion hasn't fully happened yet.
And when is that next discussion happening?
Chair Wardlow, the budget discussions happen throughout May, essentially.
So we could maybe get an answer on if this half cent tax would be one of the permanent funding streams for the trust fund in May or June or something. Okay, and then it's being weighted against all of the other priorities in the city. But given that housing is a significant priority, and kind of to Commissioner Bauke's question, which I thought was very pointed, we are very behind on our numbers. We all understand that we're in a housing crisis. We all understand we need to do more. So it's up to the council to decide, is this the biggest priority to allocate this funding stream towards or not? And that's weighted against everything else. There's not like one specific project or something that we're looking at. It's just general. Okay. I just want to understand, because obviously I think this is a really important component of how, if this is one of the main tools of how we're going to build affordable housing, I think having a really good understanding of what we're doing and what needs to happen is important for us and just everyone. Okay, next is goal 2, the prioritization of affordable housing in respect to the inclusionary housing programs. I know that we have discussed this a lot over the last couple of years. So first, I just want to level set on, we're doing the Nexus study. That will then, and the Nexus study is required, right? It's something that we have to do in order to increase the inclusionary above 15%, correct?
Chair Wardlow, what our inclusionary requires is moderate income. I believe what the state says, if it's lower income, then a study is needed. So a study is arguably not needed if it's moderate income.
Oh, okay. Well, that's very helpful, because my next question was going to be, my understanding was that it was only required if it was up to 15%. So right now we're at 10%. The last time we did this study, it was recommended to be at 15%. We decided to do 10%. So at this point, council could take action to increase the inclusionary on moderate up to 15% without a study.
Chair Wardlow, our city attorney may have.
Chair Wardlow, sorry, I'm congested today, so trying not to talk. So we want the study because we want to be able to support the numbers. So while we may not have to have it, we want it.
Okay. So it's, okay, well, that's helpful. And that's with either if we go to 15% or we go above 15%, the city would just prefer to have it. So
Right.
even though we did a study that recommended 15%.
Say it says 20%, so we would want that support.
Right. Okay, so then the city is contemplating going above 15%.
The study is looking at a variety of different options to see what makes development feasible. So it includes looking at lower income as well.
Okay.
Like part of the direction is to look at a range of different incomes and different percentages on those.
So maybe it's something where it comes back and we have 10% moderate and then 5% low, very low, or some type of variation from what we have now.
Yeah, we want to include flexibility.
And as of now, the numbers that we've all discussed that we're, concerned about, the moderate income units that we have received, although still minimal, those are all as a result of the inclusionary requirement, correct?
For the most part, yes.
And so when do we think we will get, what is the timeline exactly to get the study back and then have something, before council? Because to me, this is one of the more actionable pieces of how we are going to start to address some of these other income brackets. And I'm confused as to how, if this is the first time I've heard that the study is actually not required, because in one hearing it was, I remember it being represented as it was required. So understanding it's not required, but we want it, what is the timeline of getting this done? Because I see this as a really critical component that should be very prioritized in this overall discussion and the tools in the tool chest. I feel like we're not, I'm concerned of where we're at.
Chair Wardlow, so this was identified as something we wanted to do right off the bat, so we got a consultant very quickly. We are expecting an administrative draft sometime soon. So we haven't seen a draft yet internally. What we're hoping is to be at Planning Commission sometime this summer to discuss the study and the implications of the study before we write an ordinance related to it.
Great, that was my next question. So then the process will be studies complete, this commission reviews the study, and then do we provide a recommendation based off of the results of the study, and then that is discussed at council, and then potential ordinance direction from council?
Chair Wardlow, I expect that to be the process, but I don't know that that will be the process yet.
Okay. Okay, well, I appreciate you working with me on this specific component. And then Commissioner Barnwell mentioned the in lieu fees. My understanding is that this Nexus study this is the inclusionary and the in lieu fees, because we've all acknowledged that our in lieu fees are very low, and that would then be one of these other funding streams for the local affordable trust fund?
That's correct.
Housing trust fund?
Yes.
Okay, so all of that will be brought back together. And then the linkage fee for the hotel, all of it together. That's going to be an exciting hearing. Okay, great. I will move on to just one question on, Vice Chair asked about this a little bit, the HE 23, preservation of existing affordable housing. This report notes that 28 affordable housing covenants were extended in 2024, which is great. Do we have a sense of how many expired, just to understand the impact?
That's a great question. I don't have that here, but I will find that and share it.
Okay. I'll ask a little bit more about this, but I feel like everybody's asking you about this, and I don't know if you have the answer. But so HE 30, affordable student, staff, and faculty housing, partnering with Santa Barbara Unified. You've said that there's discussions going on. I know that members of this commission have, talked about different opportunities with land that the city owns. Where are we, what's the next step of kind of those discussions? Because I feel like I don't really have an understanding of what we're doing on that, and I think it's such a great opportunity, and that's such a valuable component of how we could really help people, especially folks that can't afford to live here.
Yes, Chair Wardlow, so Santa Barbara Unified School District, Santa Barbara City College, UCSB, when they own land, they don't need permits from the city. They don't have to comply with city zoning for the most part. So a lot of what Santa Barbara Unified has been looking at is building on their own property. So certainly support that, certainly encourage courtesy review by city boards and commissions when appropriate. City-owned land, there's City Land Registry is one of the housing element programs. I believe it's in 2027. So that involves multiple departments, Public Works, City Administrator's Office, Community Development, but we'll be looking at all city-owned land as land that's potential for development of housing, especially affordable housing.
And specific to supporting the school district, or just in general?
That's just in general.
Okay.
But it may also be specific to faculty housing or other things.
And is that analysis, is that listed as one of our kind of housing element priorities, like the city doing an analysis of the land that we own and how we can utilize city-owned land to support housing? Is that one of our priorities?
It's one of our programs that we will need to do as part of the housing element.
Which program is it?
Give me a
Just so
minute.
I know. And I ask that because, when we're talking about this component of, supporting and kind of coordinating and being excited about, I guess, the support of producing more affordable housing for teachers and students and all of that, it doesn't sound like there's much that we can do to support that. It sounds like what you're saying is that that the districts, that the schools themselves really run those kind of efforts. So given that that's a priority in our housing element, what is it that we are doing in that then?
So Chair Wardlow, the City Land Registry is HE 14. It's to evaluate city-owned
Okay.
land for donation, lease, or sale to develop affordable housing.
And when did you say that's coming back, or that component being?
2027.
So again, I think that's an
2
example
years.
of like, these seem to be like the crux pieces where we could make a difference. And and it's concerning to see that those are such long timelines, right? Like, if that's something that we own and we can help control, I'm hopeful that, I understand that those timelines are what they are, so, but thank you for pointing out, which number it is. Okay, so then again, on the efforts that we can do to support affordable student teacher housing, there's not much that we can do other than lend support, like say we're supportive of it.
Chair Wardlow, like with the city land registry, like this is a really big deal for the city. The city typically doesn't sell any of its land or redevelop it for very different purposes. All the city land was acquired for specific purposes, and like our needs have changed over time. So I would not at all be surprised if there was a partnership with like the school district or other agencies that need housing for us to provide like basic services to.
So those
to
two
our
are really
citizens.
linked, right? So this evaluation of city lands and how we would actually meaningfully do anything to support HE, HE 30 is through HE 14.
Well, I would expect the scope of that registry and evaluation to just focus on those properties, like surface parking lots downtown, and whether or not housing makes sense there versus like what opportunities, who to partner with. I think that's something separate that will be whatever opportunities are available at the time that those properties are ripe.
Okay. I think you've answered my question in that HE 14 will drive if we can do anything on HE 30. Is that right? Because we're not funding, it's not like the city is going to fund anything for the school district or anything like that. I think I had expected, and obviously, I really defer to you on this, that when it's listed as a priority of something that we as the city are taking an initiative on, that there was something that we could really do in that context, but it sounds like you're saying HE 14 would drive our involvement in supporting HE 30, and that's going to happen in 2027. That's what he noted as the evaluation of city-owned land. Is that accurate, or am I misunderstanding? I just want to make sure I'm getting it.
They don't fully overlap. HE 30 consult and coordinate with UCSB, City College, City of Goleta on housing options for student, staff, and faculty. So it's broader than that versus the city-owned land could be housing authority property.
Right, it could be more, the city-owned land could be bigger than that, right? But there's no other tools in our tool chest of how we can support, is my main question, around the HE 30.
Commissioner Wardlow, I would say we can support in means other than financial as well. Just the communication and coordination sometimes is helpful. So it's not purely about financial support.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thank you for working through this with me. Next, adaptive reuse. So on page 36, it notes that this area is targeted to the central business district. I believe this commission provided direction that we were hoping to see it more, throughout other areas of the city. Is that still being contemplated?
Chair Wardlow, absolutely. And we will be returning to your commission in May to discuss that further.
Awesome. Thank you. And then Commissioner Barnwell mentioned this a little bit, HE 8, innovative housing types. Could you just explain to me a little bit more what that means? Like, does that mean like that folks can, because obviously there's all these modular houses going, that you see online now that seem way more cost effective. Does that mean that the city would be open to, instead of, as an example, like an ADU, that somebody just put up a modular house and that's okay? Is that what this is talking about? Like that we're going to be more flexible with these kind of modular developments that are now available?
Chair Warlow, that's part of the conversation, yes. And
And
it's also like different housing type that may need a different zoning changes, like setback changes and things like that.
So there would be like ordinance changes that would be required in order to allow for these type of modulars? Or if I wanted to put a modular in my yard right now, could I do that?
Chair Wardlow, it definitely goes beyond just the modular, but like in terms of modular, right now, you could put a modular ADU in your backyard. That's not prohibited, right? It's treated like any other custom-built design.
Shed.
But there are definitely things that are associated with modular units. Like if we were to broaden that and make it on a bigger scale, we look at things such as design review, but there may be ordinance things that we look at. I know we've talked about micro units, and is that something that we want? That would need an ordinance amendment. So it's really a catch-all for kind of any type of innovation that's coming along related to housing.
Okay, and where are we kind of with, that sounds exciting and sounds like kind of a big project, because, innovation is ever evolving, but where are we with that discussions or what we need to do to kind of move that ball forward? Or is there going to be a hearing on this where you guys are going to present, like, these are the innovative new ideas that we have and these are the types of ordinance amendments that would be required? When would that all happen?
We will. So it's, again, the timelines are set out in the housing element. And you say they're really long, and in my mind, they're really short. Because
Fair,
2026
You're the one
is-
doing it. so.
2026 is 2 years away. And we're approaching halfway through this housing cycle. So it's, we've got currently 3 planning staff and long-range planning and all of these to do. So we want to meet all our timelines in the housing element. We haven't started innovative housing types yet, but I believe we start that next year. And we'll be talking about that with Planning Commission and Design Review Boards too.
Okay, great. Lastly, I'll just ask, and I think other commissioners asked about this, really excited to see the Lower East Side Community Connectivity Active Transportation Plan. I think that's a really great public benefit that we should be doing for residents. So if we don't, this all hinges on getting state funding, is that correct? If we don't have state funding, then we don't do it, or what's kind of the plan?
Chair Wardlow, that's true. And having been involved in some of these projects in the past, like we plan the projects just kind of waiting for funding and missing a cycle, trying again. And we've been successful over time.
Okay, so it's more just, we just keep trying until we get it. Okay, I like that plan. That's good. All right, that is the remainder of my questions. I will now open it up for deliberations and comments from my, sorry, I have more questions from others. Commissioner Peterson.
Real quick, thank you. HE 30, are you having informal conversations with the school district about ways to coordinate on their housing production right now?
Commissioner Peterson, not currently.
Okay. Thank you.
I have Commissioner Bauke.
It's not a question, it's a commentary.
Oh, okay. All right, we are moving on to deliberations now, and Commissioner Bauke will kick us off.
Okay, sorry about that, Madam Chair. First off, Dan, thank you for all the work on this. I mean, there's a whole lot there. And I think the rest of the commissioners agree that there's a lot of information. I do definitely want to commend you for your transparency and the honesty of some of your responses and some of the things that are written there. It's not like some of this is easy to say, but I'll take the time to sort of give you sort of my big picture thoughts on all this, so it's out there. It's really clear by what we have shown on page 2 of your staff report that we have clearly a structural and system failure based upon how our regulatory system works and the state's mandates and how that works to actually get to affordable housing in this community. You know, it is a high-cost situation, and no matter what we do, we could build 8,000 housing units, but if the private sector's requirements are only 10% or even less, they do very low and such under density bonus, we're not even going to come close to those numbers. So we have to sort of then go, okay, how can we get there? And I go back to, at least historically, remembering back in the days of redevelopment, that actually more progress was done when we had those mechanisms. And the city has now established, the Housing Trust Fund, so we now have a place to put money. So the next thought in my process, which is we really need to focus on all those things that are in Goal 8 and the implementation section HE 31, I think it is. My eyes can. Yep, HE 31, which is secure the funds. And it's clear that the private sector is not going to do it for us. So it has to be done from the public sector, maybe in conjunction with the private sector, but I just don't see it happening. So we have the Housing Authority here, which does a great job, and they can focus on the lower tiers and let the market do the upper tier as far as where I think feasible things are. So we really need to take the approach of pretty much doing every single thing that's listed in HE 31. Like every single one of them needs to be done and then put into the funding mechanisms, into the Housing Trust Fund, or we're never even going to come close. And I'm not sure how. It's very frustrating because we're not the decision-making body on a lot of these things, but we can surely recommend to the council that that's something they really need, if they're really serious. And I think we've reached, the housing crisis category. And if you're in a crisis, you act like you're in a crisis. I always see, I know the city's got limitations on resources, but it seems like all this is being slow-walked. Not deliberately, just because budgetarily and just purely you don't have the staff to get a lot of this stuff done. So, Dan, you're in a real tough spot because you've got us up here wanting to see things happen and policy changes made and actions made, and you don't have the resources and the staff to do it. There's only a few of you out there on this effort. And we've got, I see a future, which unfortunately is starting to get me even more concerned, that we've got some very, very big projects. We've got the 2 projects at La Cumbre Plaza coming forward. We've got Paseo Nuevo, and we've had a whole bunch of projects through the average density unit projects coming through the system that have yet to be built. And the reason why I asked you about the enhanced infrastructure finance district is if we don't get off our butts on that approach, because I honestly think it's the only real way to actually get large amounts of capital into this housing fund. The other stuff will help, but we're going to miss the boat if we don't have that in place. And that really is something that what the legislature thought was the answer and way to go post-redevelopment. That is their mechanism. They haven't given us any other. And they surely haven't seen anything in Sacramento talking about anything other. So that is our mechanism. And we've got very large assessed valuation changes coming forward with these projects from what their existing values are. And the property tax is just going to disappear in the ether if we don't grab it, a good chunk of it, and throw it into affordable housing. And that's the only way I think this is ever going to work, if we're ever going to make a dent on it. So I just want to put that out there. I'm very concerned that we're just not making progress. And anyway, that's my 2 cents. And thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauke. Vice Chair Boss.
Thank you, Chair. I want to reiterate just the appreciation for your transparency and acknowledgement that we're not making significant progress, especially toward addressing our housing needs. I think I know I have a lot of outstanding questions and comments and concerns, and it feels like a lot was misrepresented in the report and needs correction. Certainly before it goes to the state, which I'm confident over the next couple weeks those corrections can be made. But if it's misrepresented to us, it's misrepresented to the public. And if it's the same exact report going to council, that's misrepresented to another larger body. So I wouldn't be comfortable with council seeing the report as is next Tuesday. I think we need significant changes to it and answers to a lot of outstanding comments or questions. So I'd at least recommend to staff that this come back to Planning Commission, or at least that all of the comments are taken into consideration and the outstanding questions are answered before it goes to council. I know we're on a tight timeline, but just if we have these questions, then I imagine council and the broader public does as well, and state HCD will as well. And aside from just the corrections that need to be made to the report, again, it's really important for all of us to be able to see what's actually being submitted to state HCD. So not having that really puts us at a disadvantage. And just, I think we all want to see the progress and expedited implementation of all of these policies and programs, because that's when we do that, that's when we're going to see progress in our RENA figures, and not just progress in the above moderate, which is really where we're seeing the progress. We need to see the progress in the very low, and even moderate, and we won't see that until we implement these policies and programs. So there's a lot to handle, but I really want to emphasize the point that I'm not comfortable with the report as is going to council. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Vice Chair Boss. Next, we will hear from Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I echo times 10 the comments just made by Commissioner Balke and Commissioner Boss. I understand that we're understaffed, and understand we don't necessarily have the funding. But if anyone has ever been involved in emergency medical work, the doctors in emergency medical work do what is famously called triage. And they start working on the thing that's most important. So the twisted ankle goes to the back of the line, and the guy with a bullet wound comes forward. I don't know anything more important than what we're talking about here, the inclusionary and the in lieu discussions. Commissioner Balke is so correct when he says that we have large projects coming our way, and we need to have the ordinances in place that will allow those large projects to begin to contribute in the way we want them to. I had not thought, but I now support the idea of Commissioner Boss that I don't think this is ready to pass on. I really don't think this report is polished enough and finished enough, because anyone with expertise or not, if they read through this, the same questions we have brought up will come up again. And we don't have solid answers for them, and I think that's our job. That's on that issue. I finished my comments, but I am resoundingly in favor of the comments made by my two fellow commissioners prior. In times past, the city of let me back up a second. The schools that we were talking about a moment ago, if you've ever been to a school board meeting, whether it's City College or Santa Barbara Unified or any school board meeting, they're well-intentioned people who are focused on education, and they have no idea what land use or development is about. In times past, the city of Santa Barbara has had charrettes with Santa Barbara City College and private schools in town, and we invited them to come into the room and tell them, maybe what they have and maybe what they can do with it. I think when Chair Wardlow asks, what more can we do to help these schools? I think that's something that we can do. We have an expertise that I think we should share with some of these organizations in town who have none of that expertise. Not only that, but they're frightened by a large public comment section where they collapse under the pressure of such things, whereas we do that stuff all the time. So I would suggest that a partnership with schools would include something like that, and include private schools. They have teachers and students that are underpaid like all of them do. I sat for a while on the ADA committee for the city, and the Milpas discussion of widening the sidewalks was a big deal. And the last project we looked at on Milpas, the Pachanga nightclub, within 100 feet of the boundary lines of that were two of those large ficus trees that had shrunk the sidewalk narrower than the 36 inches that's required. And that's a public sidewalk. On that same project, I thought it was very telling when one of the business operators mentioned that in terms of former parking requirements, by underparking that project, we're pushing cars to the curb. And by pushing cars to the curb, the businesses will suffer. That whole discussion, to me, seems to be vitally important, hand in hand with the housing discussion, vis-a-vis the La Pachanga club discussion, where we just kind of shined on the whole fact that many of those residential cars are going to be parking on the curb, and oh, by the way, the businesses who are hoping that their patrons can park at the curb won't have that curb space. That kind of a discussion needs to happen. What is our curbside parking? What is parking? And how does it fit into the discussion of housing? We don't have answers to that, and I think it's an important question. I go back to what you said a moment ago. And by the way, I also want to say thank you, as has been said a couple times, for your honesty in this reportage. You know as well as we do that there's some things that need to be done, and I appreciate the fact that you just stood up and said it. The question of open space, page 34, the in-progress general plan update on open space, I hope we can redefine what we mean when we say open space, because that map is confusing to me. It was mentioned, it might have been mentioned by you, a disturbing thing to me as a planning commissioner is that Macy's project, and how the planning commission, through I guess the process of how we work, is not going to have another look at that. And not so much the architectural stuff, which I'm sure the ABR will wrestle that to the ground, but my concern is how is it interfacing through pedestrian and vehicular connections? How is it interfacing with a large parking lot
Commissioner
there?
Barnwell, that project's not agendized, so we really can't get into a discussion on it.
Okay. I guess I shouldn't have said that. We didn't, not supposed to talk about that. Okay, thank you very much. So I agree with what Commissioner Boss says. I'm not really sure that this is ready for prime time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Barnwell, and we'll next hear from Commissioner DeLuccio.
Thank you. I'm between two commissioners that made really good comments. I guess the document does need some wordsmithing to say that, I guess, before it does go anywhere. It needs wordsmithing and it needs to be thought out a little more. Still, I want to thank you for your efforts that you put behind this. I know you guys have a lot of work and you're under a lot of pressure. But I still go and thank you, Chair, for bringing up about using real estate that we have, city-owned real estate, to use that for possible housing going in the future. I know the commuter lot that we did approve on Carrillo, that was city-owned land, I believe. And maybe a way of doing that is to address parking, which is not agendized. Parking's been taken away from us by the state for a lot of the projects that we have now. But maybe the city can look at building parking structures in the future with incorporating housing into it. But I think our main thing here right now is, which I'm really surprised and I'm really frustrated, being, I came from a different city, West Hollywood. We had all these mechanisms in place years ago, before the crisis. They had a local housing trust fund. They had a housing authority, which we have a good one, and they had all the in lieu fees in place. And the in lieu fees here, what I'm gathering right now, all we have is when you build AUDs here, you can pay 10% for moderate units. But as far as any low-cost housing here, we don't really have mechanisms in place. The state does, state bonus density. That's how you're getting these very few low units. So I know that you're working on the Nexus study. I know you're working on inclusionary housing amendments, but until we get that in place, which should have been in place a long time ago, I just don't know how we're going to put a significant amount of dollars into a local housing trust fund. And we do have some major projects in front of us right now, which we probably could have benefited from. Now, I've been around a long time, and I understand where Commissioner Bolton is coming from. It used to be the Housing Redevelopment Agency, which doesn't exist anymore. And that's where a lot of the tax incentives came to the cities, and they were able to do a lot of redevelopment. So just want to throw that out too, out of all fairness. So that's why dollars are a little tight now. But again, I guess my biggest frustration is the report can be fixed, but we're not going to get housing production until we can get money into that housing trust fund, and from there you get grants and you double, triple the money, but we need that in lieu program in place, and it's really, really overdue. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLucio. And now we will hear from Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm going to start by just expressing my appreciation to Mr. Gullett and Ms. DeBusk and Ms. Ostranger for the transparency and just all the questions that you answered. I guess my approach is a little bit different. I know that this is due to the state on April 1st. We're running up against a time element. Mr. Gullett, I saw you taking copious notes. You confirmed some things would get moved around. And I guess I guess I would recommend that the changes and modifications that we identified in our discussion with you would just be reflected to council in a slide or something if you can't identify the report, just so we know, just so council and the public knows that, the local housing trust fund's going to get moved to whatever it's called, ongoing or whatever it's called, and things like that. I think you can solve quite a few of those things by that method, and get this out in time. The two most impactful things that the city can do to get more affordable housing have really already been mentioned, but our developers, most of them are not in the affordable housing business. The City Housing Authority is, People Self-Help. We've got other organizations, 501c3s, that do affordable housing. So getting the local housing trust fund permanently funded, and I emphasize the word permanently because that is part of the state certification. And from what I understand for a local housing trust fund that's state certified is it must have a permanent source of funding. And, excuse me, now that we've passed the sales tax, I think I'd like to see a generous portion of that that sales tax go, and I realize that there's a lot of pulling on the budget, but a generous portion of that going into the local housing trust fund as a permanent source. And I'd also like to see, we've had developers that they don't want to be in the business of managing affordable housing units. And that's been going on for years. And we need to give them, some have been begging for an opportunity to provide in lieu fees to our city, which could also go into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And so they don't have to actually manage these affordable units and do all the paperwork. I think the things that are imperative that we get done sooner are the BAE study, and then also studying inclusionary. Do we need a higher inclusionary rate? I just can't emphasize enough how I would like to see this advance forward at a faster pace. We've been talking about it for so long. And getting the funding done. I mean, I hate to even wait till the budget season to get the funding done for the permanent source of funding done for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. There's just lots of opportunities they leverage this money. That's what these 501c3s in our city housing authority does. They can leverage the money. So we want to get them into a substantial, generous fund where they can really get to work and do that. And then our numbers are going to change in our general plan progress report. So it's, we're all saying the same thing, but maybe that's a good thing that we're all saying the same thing up here. So I really thank you for your efforts. I understand that you're understaffed and there's a lot of work to be done. But I just think that the two top priorities are the two things that have been mentioned up here. The permanent source for the local housing trust fund and the BAE study that's going to advance in lieu fees and give developers a choice. Do I want to deposit money or do I want to manage affordable units? And also look at the inclusionary and see where we stand on that. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. And thank you to all of the commissioners and their comments. I very much agree with many of the comments that have been made by my fellow commissioners. I think there is kind of a resounding feedback around the importance of triaging, to Commissioner Barnwell's point, the importance of the housing crisis. And I think that there's frustration because we see this as the #1 issue in our community. Obviously, I'm really encouraged to see this report and see all of the other types of infrastructure projects that you all are working on and just the whole host of things that city staff is working on outside of housing. But clearly, this commission is very focused on housing because of the housing crisis and how that directly impacts residents in this community. Everyone here, everyone in staff, all knows somebody that is impacted drastically by the housing crisis. I agree with Commissioner Bauke's comments. I agree with Commissioner Boss's comments, and I appreciate the way in which Commissioner Wiscombe really laid out, there's two things that seem to be the biggest tools in our tool chest of how we can really address affordability, and it's disappointing or concerning understanding the reality that, there's only so many people and there's only so many hours in a day for you guys to get this work done, but understanding that the timelines for these are so, it's halfway through the housing cycle that we're really addressing these things. And so it's just very concerning that, we're so far away from the numbers that we need to achieve. And yet, from a timeline perspective, these bigger piece tools are not going to get really addressed until halfway through the cycle at least. So I understand that the timeline is what it is. I don't feel like there's the opportunity for us to move them or, try to speed things up. I know you guys are working as hard as you can on this. I think that, I hope that our kind of concerns are understood in that I think we all want to see more affordable housing and all of us use all the tools in the tool chest to address the affordability issues that our community is so direly facing. So I appreciate your time and the work that you've done to create this overall comprehensive report. I do agree with my fellow commissioners that I think it's important that we represent things as accurately as we can to council. But I understand that that report has been created already, so I urge the staff that just to reiterate those kind of the differences of where we really are. Some of these projects are ongoing. Some of them we've taken the first step, but there's really necessary components in order to utilize and work with the kind of initiative that still need to take place. So again, I want to really commend you for your honesty and just transparency on all of this. This has been a lot, and I appreciate your time and efforts on all of this. Oh, we have Commissioner DeLucio that would like.
Yes, this report has to go to the state by April 1st. Is that what you said?
Oh, that's correct.
Yeah, so I mean, so I guess it has to go to council because the council doesn't meet again until April 8th. They go on recess after the next meeting next Tuesday, so. So thank you. If you can convey what we discussed here today in some manner, we would appreciate that.
Yes, and thank
Yeah.
you to the commission for your thoughtful comments. The final document will look different than this one. I did take a lot of notes, and we'll make a bunch of changes before it goes there, and I'll let council know about this conversation and about some of the big things that we're going to move around and change in the document. So thank you.
Thank you so very much for all of your time on this and just for the helpful discussion. I feel like I learned a lot of just kind of where we accurately are, and I really appreciate you being so engaging with us on this. All right, that takes us to the administrative portion of our agenda. Do we have any committee and liaison reports? Staff hearing officer? Okay, well, we're going to start with Commissioner DeLucio.
I'm trying to be good. Actually, there's no staff hearing officer report because the staff officer is right in front of us here today. Your next meeting's on March 19th, next Wednesday. Then we'll have a report. Real brief on Historic Landmarks Commission. I did a look at that meeting yesterday, and they had sort of a light agenda. However, they actually approved replacing the hitching post bike racks on State and in the entire EBV street with Rambler wide racks with green finishing. And that's because I guess those the hitching post bike racks do not work with the bikes today. They need the wider racks. The Santa Barbara Mission approved an ADA compliant access ramp to the main doors, and there was a speaker who came out and said, well, it's good to finally get this after 40 years. And then an announcement, there's actually a San Roque Neighborhood Outreach meeting, and that's tonight at 6 o'clock at Peabody Charter School. The city's outreaching as they conduct a San Roque Historic Content Statement and Historic Resource Survey. And there's been some, in the past, I know the Lower Riviera and the waterfront in the downtown, they had done similar studies, context studies, the history of those areas, and then they do a survey of what's, get this, you only have to be over 45 years now to be historic, to go on to get on a postal survey list. So you're historic. I'm way over that. So anyway, that's my report today.
Thank you, Commissioner DeLucio. Do we have any other reports? Staff hearing officer report? No? Nada? All right. Well, thank you. It is now 4:08, and that concludes our March 13th, 2025 Planning Commission hearing. Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, March 20th. Thank you all for being here, and I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.